Was I expelled from Hogwarts? Hello again, dear adventurers of the multiverse. Thanks for joining us once more on this epic journey. Remember, this story is pure science fiction from our wild imagination. So don't go trying to summon dragons in your backyard. The rights of this amazing novel belong entirely to its original author. We are only the narrators. Do you want more adventures? Show some love to our YouTube channel with a subscription and a like. And if you want exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting for you with open arms. Chapter 301 Brave New World. No matter what kind of toothbrush or brushing method you use, you can only remove surface debris. You can't prevent stubborn plaque from calcifying into tartar. Therefore, teeth cleaning is essential. But having Sherry get her teeth cleaned was an impulsive and risky decision. The ponytail girl's nervous movements, awkward and hesitant posture, and trembling hands, well, her technique was as immature as she was. Well, Hermione was only a mediocre person to begin with. It was no wonder Sherry was struggling to learn. "Ah, Sherry, what's wrong?" The girl stopped what she was doing, looking at the boy nervously, and asked softly, "Ralph, did I hurt you?" "No, it's just, you seem to have made me bleed." Sherry's face flushed red, and she said in a barely audible voice, "Maybe we should stop. I might not be very good at it." "It's okay, it's just bleeding gums." Ralph licked his lips and said, "Continue." The ponytail girl hummed in agreement, afraid of hurting Ralph again, and her movements became even gentler. It was just a teeth cleaning, but by the time they finished, Sherry's forehead was covered in sweat, and her fair neck was flushed with a captivating blush. Sherry wiped her sweat, a little embarrassed, and asked worriedly, "Are your gums okay?" After rinsing his mouth, Ralph reassured her, "It's fine, the bleeding has stopped. It's your first time too, just try a few more times, and it shouldn't bleed anymore." When Hermione returned, Ralph and Sherry had already cleaned the room. The girl entered the clinic and suddenly stopped, staring at the boy sitting in the recliner. "You're finally back, Granger." Ralph leaned on the chair, deliberately lowering his voice to intimidate her. "I'm Peter Pettigrew, here to get revenge." Hell. Hermione's eyes widened, her expression wary, but she quickly noticed Fawkes perched on the box, and her tense nerves relaxed. The girl rolled her eyes and said, "Rover, you're such a liar. I lied to you to keep you on your guard," Rover said with a smirk. "Long time no see, Hermione." Hermione placed her newly bought book on the table and asked curiously, "Didn't you say you wouldn't be back until the end of August? Why are you back now? Is it because of Peter?" News of Peter Pettigrew's escape had spread throughout England, and all the newspapers were reporting on it. "Yes," Rover nodded slightly. "He escaped, and I was worried about you too. So I took the airship from Alvermorny School of Witchcraft and Wizardry back." Alvermorny's airship? Hermione's eyes widened, clearly intrigued. Ralph thought for a moment, then suddenly asked, "Hermione, you don't have any valuables in the common room, do you?" "No, but Professor McGonagall recently bought a cat tree and put it in the common room." Hermione asked suspiciously, "What's wrong?" "Nothing serious." Ralph took a breath and said, "It's just that the airship crashed into the Gryffindor Tower and destroyed your common room." Ralph glanced at Hermione's newly bought book, the top one, titled, Brave New World. Ralph coughed, sat up straight, quickly grabbed the book, and flipped through a few pages, immediately feeling somewhat disappointed. This Brave New World was a work by the famous British author Aldous Huxley, and along with Maiden's We and George Orwell's 1984, it is considered one of the dystopian trilogy of 20th century literature. It wasn't the same as the Korean comic Brave New World that Ralph had read in his previous life. "Ralph, why are you covering your mouth?" Hermione asked curiously. The boy put down his book, leaned back in his chair, and explained softly, "Bleeding gums." Hermione immediately perked up, her expression as if she were a sniff-seeing galleon. "Bleeding gums are probably caused by plaque inflammation. It's best to get your teeth cleaned. Do you want me to help you?" Ralph's face broke into a strange smile. He glanced at Sherry, winked, and teased, "No need, I'm very skilled. Sherry can testify. I've been teaching her lately." Hermione persisted. "Let me practice." "No, I mean treat you. I won't charge you." Ralph rolled his eyes. "So, you two are using him as a practice model, aren't you?" "I've already witnessed Sherry's skills." Ralph smiled. "So I have no expectations of you as my teacher." Sherry blushed and quickly changed the subject. "Ralph, have you seen Tonks? The Ministry of Magic sent her to protect us." "Yes, I saw her. Tonks was hiding in front of the supermarket across the street disguised as an old lady, Ralph said softly. When I got close to her, she wouldn't admit she was Tonks. What kind of old lady wears such large earrings and has huge tattoo stickers on her arms? No wonder Tonks had been an apprentice for 2.5 years without becoming a full-fledged Auror. There was a reason for that. The three chatted for a while longer before closing up and going home. This was just a clinic. Hermione's house was in another neighborhood. But as they were locking up, Minister of Magic Cornelius Fudge suddenly appeared, accompanied by 2 Aurors. He had obviously received a notification from Twinks that Ralph had returned and rushed over. Ralph, you're back from America. Yes, Minister. Ralph sized up Fudge, who wore a pinstripe robe, his face pale and tired. The last time they met, Fudge had been all smiles and beaming. He seemed to be having a rough time lately. Did Mr. Scamander come back with you? No, I came alone, Ralph said softly. Child, you shouldn't have come back alone at this time, Fudge said sternly. You should already know, shouldn't you? I saw the report about Rita Skeeter. Ralph nodded. That woman, Rita Skeeter, Fudge said irritably. She's caused us so much trouble. Is Skeeter's report fake news? Ralph raised an eyebrow. No, that's not it. Fudge loosened his collar, his face grim. But she alerted them, letting the news spread immediately. We had a chance to catch Peter, but she made everything worse. Fudge shifted the blame to Rita. He didn't know how that woman had found out the information, but he really wanted to kill her. What exactly happened? Ralph asked curiously. Did Peter escape from Azkaban? No. Fudge glanced around, then carefully chose his words, slowly saying, Ralph, you captured Peter, and I won't hide it from you. Someone attacked Dexter, then used Polyjuice Potion to impersonate him, launching a surprise attack during the transport and rescuing Peter. Dexter, Ralph narrowed his eyes. Did the attacker get the information from him? No, Fudge sighed deeply. That's the problem. Peter is a very important criminal. Only a few of us high-ranking officials knew about his transfer. The time and the people escorting Peter to Azkaban were also decided and communicated to me and the head of the Auror office on short notice. The attacker obviously knew he was one of the Aurors being transported before Dexter, and then attacked him ahead of time, switching him. Ralph frowned. In Chapter 302, Scamander, the bodyguard from North Sea. The Ministry of Magic has its own set of procedures for escorting prisoners, especially serious offenders. To prevent prison breaks, only a few Aurors are designated to carry out the mission on the day of the escort. In other words, even the Aurors themselves don't know who will be carrying out the escort mission. After receiving the mission, they will set off immediately without much delay. Therefore, it's virtually impossible to attack an Auror during this time, then impersonate an Auror and infiltrate the escort team. Unless, of course, the attacker knew before dexterity that he would be escorting Peter Pettigrew to Azkaban. But here's the problem, only 2 or 3 wizards know who the Auror will be, and Peter's escape would affect their careers, like Fudge's. They have no reason to leak this information to anyone. So, how did the attacker know this information? And who could the attacker be? Ralph guessed it was a Death Eater. There are quite a few Death Eaters on the run, but they are mostly like Malfoy and Goyle. They wouldn't go to rescue Peter. After all, being a Death Eater is just a job, being a fence-sitter is their livelihood. Could it be Barty Crouch Jr.? The possibility is slim, not to mention he's most likely still under Crouch's control and unable to escape. Even if he did escape, where would he have gotten the news that the Dexter was escorting Peter? Crouch has been suspended and under investigation, so he has no chance of knowing this information. Therefore, who kidnapped Peter? Ralph has absolutely no clue. Of course, Fudge doesn't know who the killer is either. He came to see Ralph not to discuss this issue, but to inquire about the boy's safety. Ralph captured Peter and even gave him minor physical care during the arrest. If Peter escapes, he might seek revenge on the boy. Peter's escape is already a headache for Fudge. If Ralph is killed as well, the public outcry will threaten his position as Minister of Magic. That's why Fudge, despite his busy schedule, took time to see Ralph, hoping to persuade him to return to America and not come back before Peter is caught. The village is giving out gold bars. Hurry back. Ralph, of course, refused. Fudge then suggested that Ralph stay at his house for a few days before returning to Hogwarts after the start of the school year. To entice Ralph, the minister also told him that he had a beautiful sister-in-law who is currently staying at his house, and he would introduce her to Ralph if he visited. Ralph refused again, Protecting Sherry and Hermione's safety was more important than Fudge's beautiful sister-in-law. Besides, between Fudge's house and the Granger's house, with their parents away, only Sherry and Hermione were at the Granger's house. Did he need to hesitate about where to stay? So, Ralph decisively refused Fudge and then followed Sherry and Hermione out of the clinic, heading towards the Granger's house. They eventually crossed a lush green lawn and arrived at a 3-story detached villa. Hermione took out her key, opened the door, and went inside. She then knelt down and pulled a pair of brand new slippers from the shoe cabinet for the boy. She grinned and said, "Please come in." Ralph changed into the slippers, entered the room, and looked around. The first floor was the living room, furnished in a tranquil and elegant style. Besides a sofa, coffee table, and television, there was a Zidle-style record player cabinet with a beautiful record player on it. A full-length bookcase was filled with hundreds of vinyl records. Seeing the boy looking at the record player, Hermione explained, "My dad collected them all, he really likes these things." Ralph nodded. "Sherry and I will clear out a room upstairs for you later," Hermione said with a smile. "No need for that," Ralph waved his hand. "I can sleep in the trunk, there's a bed inside, I can just put it anywhere." "No way. You're a guest, how can I let you sleep in your trunk? That would be too rude." Hermione shook her head. "Don't be shy, it's not a hassle to unpack." "But," the girl blinked and smiled, "you have to pay rent." "Rent?" Ralph raised an eyebrow. "Yes," Hermione grinned, revealing a pair of large front teeth. "You can't just stay for free, right, Sherry?" "That's right." The girl with the ponytail smiled and said, "It's time to pay rent." Ralph looked at Sherry. "Whose assistant are you? This guy with thick eyebrows and big eyes, has he started to betray us too?" "Hey, you two, get this straight, I'm here to protect you," Ralph protested vehemently. "You don't pay me a salary, and now you want me to pay rent? Even capitalists don't exploit people like this." "Then let's vote, the three of us, and see if you have to pay rent," Hermione suggested. 2 votes are enough for a pass." Hermione raised her arm as she spoke, just like she always did when she was in Hogwarts. Sherry's smile was exceptionally bright, and she also raised her arm. Seeing Ralph approach, she quickly hid behind Hermione, even making a playful face at the boy. 2 votes in favor, Hermione announced. Ralph sighed. "You guys understand democracy." "What rent?" The boy covered his collar, feigning shyness, and said, "I have no money, and I don't sell my body, witches. Please have mercy, don't go too far." Hermione blushed and spat. "Who wants you to sell yourself? From now on, the cooking job is yours." Damn, Ralph wanted to be a bodyguard in the North Sea, not a full-time nanny. "Hurry up and cook." Hermione pointed to the kitchen and laughed. "The ingredients are all in the refrigerator, they're all yours from now on." "Okay, you two win." Ralph smiled. "Don't regret it later." The boy planned to learn from Tina how to make some traditional Arizona food to give Shirley and Hermione a little Arizona shock. Ralph had also brought back a lot of Mexican chilies. As the origin of chilies, about half of the world's chilies are grown in Mexico, and Mexicans love spicy food, ranking among the top 3 in the world in per capita chili consumption. They even eat chilies like fruit. Therefore, Mexico has some of the hottest chilies in the world. Just a tiny bit can have a very spicy effect. So, when Ralph served the dish, it looked fine on the surface, but after just one bite, Hermione and Shirley couldn't help but drink water. Hermione stuck out her tongue, feeling countless hot and spicy sensations swirling in her mouth. She put down her cup, feeling dizzy. Shirley picked up a fork and turned the curled-up snake soup, the spicy aroma of the seasonings bringing tears to her eyes. "Try this, you two." Ralph picked up the dish of chili-cooked onions, cactus, and eggs, and placed it in the 2 girls' bowls. He smiled and said, "This is the best, don't waste it. You have to finish all the food tonight, Sherry." Hermione, thanks to the generous donations from QQ Reading readers 156,379,413, Excavator Parts, and Deadly Night. Chapter 303 Ralph, "Sherry, does it still hurt?" After dinner, Ralph left his room and began patrolling the area around the house. He had placed numerous magical creatures in the corners for surveillance, so he would be alerted if any wizard tried to approach. Ralph wanted to cast protective magic, but minors using magic outside of school would receive warning letters from the Ministry of Magic. Of course, it wasn't Ralph who received the letters, but Hermione. The Ministry of Magic could detect magic, but not the caster. Hermione was the only registered junior wizard in this neighborhood, so if anyone used magic, it would be attributed to her. Dinner had already put Hermione in a difficult position. If he put her in a difficult position now, Ralph figured he'd really be homeless and have to go live with Fudge's beautiful sister-in-law. As a bodyguard, even though it was his first day on the job, Ralph was still very responsible, leaving detection points everywhere, leaving no blind spots. When the boy returned to his room, he found the box open. After thinking for a moment, he entered the box and, sure enough, saw Sherry. The girl was cleaning the room. The unicorn-furred broom swept across the floor, creating gentle breezes. Ralph silently walked over, helped Sherry empty the dirty water, and filled a new bucket with clean water. As he placed the water on the floor, he asked softly, "Does it still hurt?" Sherry immediately blushed, knowing the answer already, and asked, "What?" Ralph glanced down, his gaze landing on the girl's slightly bent, protruding buttocks. Just one glance, and Sherry felt as if she'd been electrocuted. She immediately straightened up, turned around, and glared at Ralph, a hint of embarrassment and annoyance on her face. "Where are you looking?" she demanded. "Don't get excited," Ralph said softly. "That's what happens when you eat too many chilies. You get a burning sensation, especially after you've used the toilet." Sherry gripped the broom tightly, annoyed. "Then why did you put so many chilies in your dinner?" "I only put one small chili," Ralph chuckled. "About the size of a thumb. How could it be so spicy?" The girl looked incredulous. "I gave you a chili called a habanero, also known as the ghost pepper," Ralph grinned. "It's the spiciest chili in the world. Muggles even use it to make tear gas." "You and Hermione ate all of your dinner. In my experience, your butts are definitely burning right now." Sherry, broom in hand, was at a loss for words. Discussing this sensitive topic with Ralph felt wrong. Seeing Ralph's gaze fall on her again, the girl with the ponytail was truly enraged. She raised her foot to stomp on Ralph, but he dodged it. Unwilling to give up, she grabbed the broom in her hand, ready to punch him. Seeing the situation was bad, Ralph quickly turned and ran, rushing out the wooden door. Sherry didn't chase after him, but stood there, a slight smile playing on her lips. But then, the boy suddenly poked his head out and said, "Sherry, I have a potion here that can relieve the symptoms. Do you want it?" A small bottle appeared in Ralph's hand, which he gently shook in midair. Sherry blinked, clearly struggling internally. After a moment, she pursed her lips and nodded, "Yes." "Then throw away that broom," Ralph laughed. "Throw it away and I'll give it to you." Sherry gently threw the broom at the boy. Ralph ducked and turned, then stretched out his leg, lightly flicking the broom with his toe, caught it, and placed it on the ground. He leaned on the broom with his right hand and said, "Catch." Ralph tossed the potion bottle high into the air, and Sherry gently caught it. She opened the cap and smelled a strange odor. Her beautiful, misty eyes widened as she asked, "Does it really work?" "I'm not lying to you." Ralph, broom in hand, walked over and said, "Look, I ate so much food and I'm perfectly fine, because I drank this potion beforehand." Sherry was speechless. She and Hermione had seen Ralph eating heartily, seemingly unbothered by the spiciness, so they had followed suit, never expecting he had taken the potion beforehand. "Damn it." Sherry swallowed the potion, while Ralph plopped down at the table. The items and books on the table had been neatly arranged by Sherry, and she had even placed a new pot of violets, carefully trimmed, next to a pot of calamus, vibrant and green. There was a stack of photos on the table. Ralph picked them up, and a soft voice whispered in his ear, "A friend you met during your vacation." Shirley walked over and sat down next to the boy. "Yes, I met them on the Mayflower, and then we took a lot of pictures." Ralph picked up a photo and introduced it. "Her name is Fleur, and this is her sister Gabrielle." The boy quickly began to recount his experiences on the Mayflower, the Fleur sisters, Cabroran, the ghost ship, and Marcella. After listening, Shirley, whose thoughts had drifted, regained her composure. She didn't speak, but instead carefully examined the photos, then glanced at Ralph discreetly. After a moment, the girl with the ponytail looked at Fleur's photo and murmured, "She's really beautiful." Ralph suddenly laughed. "What are you laughing at?" Shirley raised an eyebrow. "I remembered something interesting," Ralph said softly. "When Fleur saw your picture, she said the same thing, that you're really pretty." Sherry looked up from the photo, staring into Ralph's eyes, and asked, "What did you say then?" Ralph leaned back in his chair, smiling slightly. "I told Fleur that I thought so too, that you're very pretty." The girl with the ponytail blushed instantly, her face turning as red as a peach blossom. Ralph gazed at the girl's pretty face and whispered, "Sherry, what's wrong? Your face is so red." Like what?" Ralph thought for a moment, then said seriously, "Like a burning, fiery ash snake, hot and dazzling." Sherry felt her cheeks burning, her throat throbbing, and she could hardly breathe. She lowered her head, her eyelashes trembling slightly, and said, "You must have put chili peppers in your potion. Even a whole ghost pepper wouldn't make it this red." Ralph smiled. Shirley covered her burning cheeks, then pressed one cheek against the cold table. "I want to hear your story from your journey," she asked. "It's a long story," Ralph replied, also leaning on the table, meeting her gaze. "It's okay, I love to hear it." Shirley glanced at the clock, which was already pointing to 12, and said, "It's still early." Ralph was silent for a moment, then gently tugged at Shirley's ponytail, his eyes smiling. "Does it still hurt?" This time, Shirley wasn't embarrassed or annoyed, she simply laughed. When she laughed, even the blooming violets on the table paled in comparison. "It doesn't hurt anymore." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 304 Ralph single-handedly withstands 2 guns. The consequences of cooking too spicy food became apparent the very next day. Early in the morning, as Rove was about to go to the kitchen to make breakfast, Hermione, who had just returned from the supermarket, hurriedly called out, "Rove, let me do it." Rove stopped, looking at Hermione with surprise as she carried her bag, and asked, "You're making breakfast?" "That's right." Hermione walked over, beaming, and said, "Last night in the bathroom, cough cough, I suddenly realized something. You're a guest, so I really shouldn't let you cook. Look, I got up early to buy a lot of groceries, so let me do it." Rove looked down to see what ingredients were available, but Hermione quickly stepped in front of him, then turned and ran quickly to the kitchen, rubbing her hands together excitedly, shouting, "Go rest, I'll definitely give you a surprise. Anyway, stay away from this damn kitchen from now on." Rove, having nothing to do, sat on the sofa watching TV. The news was on, basically reporting that Britain was peaceful and prosperous domestically, but in dire straits outside. The most amusing thing was that a reporter from the New York Times was reporting on the New York Times strike. Good grief, they're making up news when there isn't any, huh? A while later, Shirley came downstairs. She'd stayed up until 3 a.m. in Ralph's trunk last night and looked exhausted, lacking energy. "Good morning, Ralph." Shirley sat on the sofa, drowsily hugging a cushion and resting her head on it. The sleepy-eyed girl with the ponytail, who was about to take a nap, opened her eyes wide after hearing a slight noise from the kitchen. "Ralph, you're sitting here, who's in the kitchen?" "Hermione." Ralph shrugged. "She said she's making breakfast." The girl with the ponytail yawned, shifting to an even more relaxed and comfortable position on the sofa. She said with a hint of schadenfreude, "Then you're in trouble." Shirley was right. Hermione did want revenge. After all, Ralph had given her her first experience of that unique kind of pain last night. The girl quickly served breakfast: skinless egg and cheese pancakes, chia seed oatmeal porridge with yogurt and berries, and tomato toast. However, this was Sherry and Hermione's breakfast, while Ralph's was a special edition. "Try my homemade stir-fried green and red peppers and spicy chili peppers," Hermione said with a smile, pushing the plate in front of the boy. She grinned and said, "Ralph, don't be shy, finish it all." Ralph cautiously examined the bottle of unidentified green liquid and asked, "What's this?" "I just squeezed some fresh juice for you." Hermione's smile widened. "It's not made with chili peppers, is it?" Ralph squinted and guessed. "That's right." Hermione's lips curled into a smug smile as she gazed at the boy's frozen profile. "Hurry up and drink it. I added extra pepper, citron peppercorns, and mustard, all top-quality ingredients." Ralph picked up the chili sauce, took a small sip, and suddenly clutched his stomach, his face filled with terror. He pointed a trembling finger at Hermione and stammered, "This chili sauce is wrong, it's poisonous." "Peter Pettigrew, don't pretend," Hermione scoffed. But the boy's limbs twitched, his eyes rolled back, and white foam spurted from his mouth, a truly frightening sight. It completely deflated Hermione's confidence, making her increasingly uneasy. "Hey, are you all right? Don't scare me." Hermione's heart tightened, her face paling. She quickly stood up and rushed to Ralph's side. Ralph chuckled, regaining his composure. Just kidding, you idiot, you always fall for it. You can never win a bet against me. I'm going to kill you. Hermione lunged at the bastard, ready to fight him to the death. But Ralph had already jumped up and run, stealing Hermione's breakfast in the process. The girl with the ponytail sat in a chair, eating her breakfast while laughing gleefully. Sherry, come save your boss. I'll give you double pay. Sherry looked at the boy with a pitiful expression of helplessness. Sherry, help me stop him. Okay, Ralph. Surrounded by the two girls, Ralph tried to fight off their dual pistols, but reality was cruel. Faced with a relentless barrage, his slender build, ultimately, he was no match and suffered a crushing defeat. After a period of playful banter, the three of them sat panting on the sofa watching TV. The news anchor was reporting on a fugitive criminal. The public must be aware that Peter Pettigrew is armed and has accomplices, making him extremely dangerous. Scotland Yard has set up a hotline. Anyone who knows Peter's whereabouts must report immediately. Where could he be hiding? Hermione asked softly. They'll probably go to Albania to find Voldemort, and then return to England, Ralph said. That's exactly what Peter did in the original timeline. He found Voldemort first, then brought him back to England, and then went to find Barty Crouch Jr. But this was extremely coincidental, because Peter happened to run into Bertha Jorkins, who was on holiday in Albania. Bertha Jorkins knew that Barty Crouch Jr. was still alive, even though she was under Crouch's oblivion charm, but under Voldemort's torture, she still obtained this crucial information. In other words, Peter and Voldemort's search for Barty Crouch Jr. in the original timeline was extremely coincidental. Now, they certainly wouldn't go looking for Barty. Of course, Crouch is still worth keeping an eye on, including Riddle House. Where are we going today? Sherry asked the boy. I need to go to the Ministry of Magic, Ralph said calmly. I need to apply for something. What is it? The information about Dementors left by Extus, Ralph explained. I also want to go to Azkaban prison, to do some on-site research. Alright, how are we going to get to the Ministry of Magic? Ralph asked expectantly. Just as the boy was about to speak, the girl with the ponytail sitting next to him coughed, interrupting him. No night bus. Last Christmas, Ralph took her to Nocturne Alley on the night bus, and he even tied her to a chair. The girl still remembered it vividly. Ralph wanted to say something more, but feeling Sherry's gaze, the boy sadly shut his mouth. Riding the night bus was so much fun. Not only was there a roller coaster ride, but you could also experience bondage play. Let Tonks lead us there, Ralph said after a moment's thought. She should be nearby. After the three of them closed the door, Ralph observed for a while, then walked towards a lawn and said to a strange old lady, Tonks, we're going to the Ministry of Magic. The old lady looked up at Ralph and asked, Child, who is Tonks? Don't pretend, Ralph said, pointing to the magazine in her hand. An old lady your age reading Muggle Playboy, is that right? The old lady's appearance changed back to Tonks's. She raised her eyebrows and chuckled. Ralph, you must have read Playboy, right? Otherwise, how come you're so familiar with this magazine? Sherry and Hermione both looked up, bewildered, at the magazine cover with its extremely revealing photos of women. I'm not familiar with it, Ralph quickly coughed. I've only seen this kind of magazine in Professor Snape's office. Seeing that Tonks was about to say something, Ralph quickly handed her the chili sauce he was about to throw in the trash. You haven't had breakfast yet, have you? No, thanks. Tonks took the drink, took a large gulp, and instantly her face turned bright red, as if her insides were on fire. She spat it out. What is this stuff? Tonks asked. It's so spicy. Hermione's homemade authentic London soybean juice. Chapter 305 The Avengers. With Tonks around, things were much easier. She could apparate, and the four of them quickly arrived at the Golden Hall of the Ministry of Magic. Unfortunately, they arrived just in time for a press conference, where a group of reporters surrounded Minister Fudge. Minister, is there any news about Peter? Not yet, Fudge said wearily. We are working hard to recapture Peter Pettigrew, and we implore you all, the wizarding world, to remain calm and give us some more time. Minister, how much longer? Can you give us a definite answer? A reporter raised his hand and said, It's been almost a month since Peter escaped, and we haven't seen the Ministry of Magic take any action, Fudge said angrily. We've done a lot of work. If only you had opened your eyes, if only you weren't blind. You mean informing the Muggle Prime Minister about Peter's escape? Another reporter shouted. I've noticed that Muggle News is already reporting on Peter. I have to do this. Don't you know how dangerous Peter is? Fudge exclaimed. He killed 13 innocent muggles more than a decade ago. Anyone who encounters him is in danger, wizards or muggles alike. I must remind the Muggle Prime Minister. And there are many muggles. Perhaps someone will happen to see Peter and provide us with a clue, but that seems to violate the statute of secrecy. Minister, I have the assurance of the Muggle Prime Minister, Fudge glared. He won't reveal Peter's true identity to anyone, he'll only say Peter is a murderer, but some members of the International Wizarding Federation seem to disapprove of your approach, another reporter asked. Mr. Fontaine criticize you, Fontaine. Fudge suddenly heard a French surname and roared, a Frenchman has no right to interfere in the internal affairs of the British wizarding world, but he is of French descent, an American, and now an American wizard. Minister, is it possible to capture Peter before the Quidditch World Cup opens next year? Isn't that quite a feat, Minister? Which do you think is more difficult, England qualifying for next year's World Cup or capturing Peter Pettigrew? The reporter's tricky questions bombarded Fudge's mind, creating a maddening noise. His headache suddenly flared up, as if a curse had pierced his head, causing it to throb with pain. Ralph, standing at a distance, listened for a while and also felt the pressure. Indeed, not just anyone can be a minister. Just then, someone spotted Ralph waiting for the elevator. Someone shouted, and all the reporters rushed over. Ralph stepped forward, shielding Sherry and Hermione behind him as the reporters surrounded him. Mr. Scamander, what are your thoughts on Peter Pettigrew's escape? Mr. Scamander, did the Ministry of Magic provide you with protection? Mr. Scamander, as the hero who captured Peter Pettigrew, are you afraid he'll seek revenge? A barrage of questions rained down on him. Ralph didn't chase them away, but remained restrained and polite. He smiled and said, revenge is a wonderful thing, but that word isn't quite accurate to describe Peter. Then what word would be accurate? One reporter asked. Traitor, coward, Death Eater, liar, murderer, and so on, Ralph said, narrowing his eyes. Each word represents a crime. Peter bears countless sins, and a group of people want to kill him and taste the sweetness of revenge. Dumbledore, Black, Lupin. A whole bunch of Avengers who hate him are already burning with rage and can't wait to avenge James Potter and Lily Potter, not to mention those wizards who have lost loved ones because of the Death Eaters. They will form an Avengers, roar with righteous anger, fight for their loved ones, and eliminate every Death Eater. Everyone fell silent. The two girls standing behind Ralph, the reporters, Minister Fudge, and the Ministry of Magic officials all surrounded the impassioned blonde boy. Ladies and gentlemen, please remember, Peter's escape is not the end, but the beginning of revenge. Every Avenger is waiting for him. Peter will regret not staying in Azkaban, because then he could have kept his life. You ask me if I'm afraid of revenge. The boy looked at the group of reporters and raised his voice. I think that question is best left to Peter Pettigrew. Peter, I know you can hear me. I'm right here waiting for you to come and seek revenge, but until then, you'd better be alive. After Ralph finished speaking, the wizards, already stirred up by his words, clapped wildly. With a series of clanging and clattering sounds, an elevator descended in front of them. Ralph whispered to the stunned Sherry and Hermione behind him, hurry up and get in. The two then snapped out of their daze and stepped into the elevator. The boy walked slowly forward, smiling brightly, and said, ladies and gentlemen, this is enough for you. Goodbye. Ralph pressed button number 9, and the gate slammed shut. The elevator made a jarring clattering sound. Once inside, it remained quiet. Ralph turned and asked, what's wrong with you two? Sherry, who hadn't spoken until now, suddenly said seriously, Ralph, if Peter comes looking for revenge, I'll protect you with my life. Me too, Hermione quickly added. Thank you, Ralph said, somewhat touched. He smiled and said, we'll protect each other. Tonks glanced at Ralph with interest, then at the two girls, and whistled, Ralph, you're really something. Anyway, amazing in every sense of the word, Tonks praised. Ralph changed the subject. I heard Mad-Eye Moody is retiring. Yes, he's been teaching me aura skills lately, Tonks sighed, looking melancholy. I've already outlasted 3 mentors. The first mentor died in a mission, the second transferred to another department, and the third was Moody. I didn't expect him to retire so suddenly. Tonks looked distressed. Ralph stared at Tonks in astonishment. What bad luck. He'd outlasted 3 aura teachers and still hadn't become a full aura? This suddenly reminded the boy of a classmate from his past life who had outlasted several tutors and still hadn't graduated, until finally no professor dared to take his place. The elevator slowly ascended, the chains rattling. When it stopped, a cold, female voice said, "Department of Mysteries." The gate opened, and Ralph stepped out of the elevator. He suddenly stopped, staring at the wizard in the distance, and exclaimed in surprise, "Professor McGonagall." Chapter 306 The Lost Fire Dragon Skeleton Fossil. Professor McGonagall was about to enter a room when she heard the shout. Turning around, she saw the familiar figures and looked surprised. "Mr. Scamander, what are you doing here?" "I've come to the Department of Mysteries to request access to some information about Azkaban." Ralph walked towards Professor McGonagall, smiling. "Professor, what are you doing here?" Professor McGonagall hesitated for a moment, glancing at Hermione out of the corner of her eye, and said softly, "I've come to do something for Professor Dumbledore." Ralph thought for a moment and suddenly understood. Professor McGonagall was probably there to help Hermione apply for a time-turner. Hogwarts students need to choose courses in their third year, and Hermione had chosen all of them, creating a time conflict, requiring the time-turner. Of course, not everyone can apply for a time-turner. One must have a school guaranteeing academic excellence and the Ministry of Magic's approval. A student like Ralph would likely have a hard time succeeding. While his academic performance was indeed excellent, his immediate family was under close surveillance, making him a student who wouldn't pass the political vetting. Just then, the circular wall of the hall suddenly began to rotate, emitting a deafening rumble, and the blue candles on the wall blurred into dazzling halos of light. Soon, the rumble subsided, and everything returned to calm. Ralph looked up, surveying the room. It was a hall in the style of an ancient Greek amphitheater, with walls and floors made of black marble. 12 black doors, evenly distributed on the walls, were completely identical, without any markings or handles. As the wall rotated, the positions of the doors were completely disrupted, making it impossible to discern which door was the original entrance. Seeing several people looking around the room, Professor McGonagall explained, "The Department of Mysteries Hall has 12 doors in total. One door is the exit, leading to an elevator. The other 11 doors lead to 10 special rooms and an office." "Professor McGonagall, what's with the rotating walls?" Hermione asked curiously. "It's very similar to the staircases at Hogwarts," Professor McGonagall said. "Every time you enter a room and return to the Great Hall, the walls rotate, randomly shuffling the positions of the doors." "Then how do we find the room we want to go to?" Shirley asked. "Do we just rely on luck?" "Perhaps," Hermione thought for a moment, then cleverly suggested, "we can make a mark on each door we enter, so even if the walls rotate and shuffle, we'll know which rooms we've been in." "No," Tonks suddenly said. "These doors are enchanted, the marks won't last long and will disappear automatically." "That's right," Professor McGonagall explained patiently, as if lecturing in a transfiguration class. "Actually, it doesn't have to be that complicated. Just enter each room, choose the first door on the right, don't go back, and ignore the other doors. Just keep going, and you'll be able to visit every room without repeating any." Professor McGonagall randomly pushed open a door and whispered, "Follow me." Everyone followed Professor McGonagall into a square room. The room was almost empty, except for a huge glass tank in the center filled with a dark green liquid. Many milky white things floated in the liquid. "What are those things?" Shirley asked, staring at the milky white objects. Ralph observed them. They appeared and disappeared in the depths of the green liquid, gleaming eerily, like slimy cauliflower. He forced a sigh of nausea and said, "Brain matter, why does the Ministry of Magic keep these things? I heard Professor Dumbledore mention them before." Professor McGonagall whispered, "The Department of Mysteries is studying how the brain produces thought. They're also researching the differences between the brains of muggles, squibs, and wizards. In short, these things are dangerous. They like to attach themselves to people's heads, draining their thoughts and turning wizards into idiots." Hearing Professor McGonagall's words, everyone immediately moved away from the pool. Professor McGonagall walked to the first door on her right, pushed it open, and looked at the boy, asking, "Rolf, why are you back now?" "I had to come back because of Peter." "Professor, are you alone?" Professor McGonagall asked with concern. "Have Newt and Tina returned?" "No." Ralph glanced at Professor McGonagall and said, "But Professor Hicks came with me. She's at Hogwarts." "Oh, Professor Hicks is here too." Professor McGonagall smiled. "I'll go back to school later to see her. Professor Hicks is probably afraid to see you for now." Ralph cautiously observed Professor McGonagall's expression and asked, "You didn't go back to school yesterday?" "No." Professor McGonagall asked curiously, "What happened?" Professor Hicks's airship collapsed the ceiling of the Gryffindor common room, Ralph whispered. Professor McGonagall, who had been cheerful, suddenly fell silent, looking somewhat withdrawn. Clearly, the boy had brought her some unpleasant news. They quickly entered the third room, a room filled with fossils and specimens, resembling a mysterious circus. On the shelves in the corridor were bottles and jars of various shapes and sizes used to preserve species, containing specimens of various magical creatures. Salamanders, stinging jellyfish, mithra rats, and many other specimens that Ralph couldn't recognize. Besides the specimens, there were various ancient fossils of extinct magical creatures pieced together to recreate their appearance in life. The group walked along the corridor to an old, gray wooden door, cracked and seemingly ordinary. "This is the Department of Mysteries office." Professor McGonagall knocked on the door, then turned and said, "I'll go in first, and it'll be your turn soon. Do you know how to get out?" "Go back the way we came." Hermione thought for a moment and said, "Through the door on the left." "No." McGonagall shook her head, "It's the same way we came in and out. Keep going through the door on the right, and you'll eventually return to the original hall. Then go through the door on the right, and you'll leave." The door creaked open, and a pale-faced middle-aged man stepped out. Professor McGonagall looked at the man and asked curiously, "Where's Mr. Saul Crook?" "He was the one who reviewed my application," the middle-aged wizard replied expressionlessly. "Mr. Crook is on sick leave. I'll be receiving you, Professor McGonagall." Professor McGonagall nodded and went into her office, leaving Ralph and the others in the room. Just then, Sherry suddenly pointed into the distance and exclaimed, "Ralph, look at that." Ralph followed the direction the girl with the ponytail was pointing and saw the skeleton of a fire dragon. His eyes widened because the fossilized fire dragon skeleton was over 100 meters long. Ralph looked at Sherry incredulously and said, "This is the fossil that went missing from the Romanian fire dragon reserve." Chapter 307. My name is Kavinisgand. As one of the most dangerous magical creatures in the world, the dragon's terror lies not only in its breadth and high defense, but also in its enormous size. However, the largest dragons generally only reach a length of 20 meters or so. In the modern magical world, dragons over 100 meters long simply don't exist. Just like the feathered serpent god, it's long since extinct. The only way to see a 100-meter-long dragon is to visit excavated fossil remains, and Ralph and Sherry saw one last year in the Romanian Dragon Reserve. It was a dragon skeleton unearthed by dwarves in a mine. But strangely, the dragon fossil, unearthed not long ago, suddenly disappeared in full view of everyone. The Romanian Dragon Reserve immediately launched an investigation, but found nothing, and even caused animosity between dwarves and wizards. Ralph never expected that, a year later, after he had almost forgotten about it, he would see this fossil in the Department of Mysteries at the British Ministry of Magic. The British Muggle government is known as Europe's biggest troublemaker. Could the Ministry of Magic also be doing this kind of dirty work, deliberately instigating conflict between Romanian wizards and dwarves? Standing beneath the dragon skeleton, Rove looked around with curiosity, even reaching out to touch the fossil. He asked hesitantly, "Is this really it?" "It is," Shirley said with certainty, her long, bright eyes blinking. "I remember it clearly. That dragon fossil was missing a claw, and its skull was cracked." Rove looked up, and indeed, it was exactly as the girl had described. The details were perfect. It seemed the thief had been found. "What are you talking about?" Hermione asked curiously. Rove quickly recounted the case of the missing dragon fossil from Romania last year. "Impossible," Tonks retorted. "How could we possibly steal from others? Haven't we stolen enough?" Rove rolled his eyes. "Tell me honestly, how many artifacts does the British Museum actually own?" Sigh, the inherent weakness of the British, they love to possess anything good. Just then, the door opened again, and the middle-aged man, having finished with Professor McGonagall's matter, welcomed them into his office. It was called an office, but it was actually a dark, messy little room with only a table and a bookshelf, barely enough for 5 people. There were 4 small doors in the surrounding stone walls. Ralph noticed a nameplate hanging on the man's chest that read, "The Silent One, Roderick Bode." Employees of the Department of Mysteries were called Silent Ones, as the name suggests, silent people. They never revealed their work within the Department of Mysteries to others and rarely interacted with other departments. Therefore, many Ministry of Magic officials didn't even know the Department of Mysteries existed. Ralph sat down and handed over a library card. Looking at the document classification number on the card, Bode shook his head. I'm sorry, Mr. Scamander, this document is top secret, beyond my authority. It requires the director's personal approval. Take me to see your director, Ralph said softly. This library card was applied for by Newt and required the signatures of both the minister and the director of the Department of Mysteries to borrow top-secret documents. Fudge has already signed, but it still needs the director of the Mysteries' approval. Ralph is here today to get it signed. Bode walked to the second door on the left. Knocked lightly, and an aged voice came from inside. What is it, Bode? Director, a wizard has requested to borrow a top-secret document, which exceeds my signing authority. Your personal approval and signature are required. Let him in. The door creaked open, and Bode said softly, you can go in alone. Ralph stood up, asked Sherry and Hermione to wait a moment, and then strode into the room. He pushed open the door and entered a dark room. It was a large room, with green flames dancing on the 20-meter-high ceiling. The gleaming black marble walls and ceiling flickered with flames, bathing the entire room in an emerald light. A wizard sat in a chair. Through the dim light, the boy could barely make out that he was an old man with a face covered in wrinkles, like tree bark. Ralph handed over the documents, but the old man merely glanced at them and shook his head. My approval is still denied, Director. My grandfather has been applying to the Department of Mysteries for nearly half a century to access Ixtis's notes, but you have refused each time. Is there a particular reason? Ixtis studied Dementors for a long time. His notes are too dangerous. The old man shook his head. They shouldn't be borrowed, they should be sealed away forever, but if I may be so bold, Ralph urged. Even Minister Fudge agreed. Why do you keep refusing? If I'm not mistaken, the minister's orders should be paramount. Child, don't try to pressure me with the minister's name, the old man said calmly. The Department of Mysteries existed before the Ministry of Magic was established. It has a great deal of autonomy and can ignore the minister's interference. Back then, even someone as powerful as Radolf Lestrange tried to close the Department of Mysteries, but failed. I quickly ousted him from his position as minister. Radolf Lestrange? Ralph frowned. What an unfamiliar name. It seems the young people these days haven't heard of this renowned minister of magic. The old man chuckled, pursing his lips. Lestrange served as Minister for Magic from 1835 to 1841, a minister from over 200 years ago? Rove raised an eyebrow, his eyes widening. Excuse my intrusion, Minister, how old are you this year? Minister Ferrus Spavian and I went to Slytherin together, the old man blinked. You must know Ferrus Spavian, right? Rove certainly knew Ferrus Spavian, they had met last year at Nico's funeral. Ferrus Spavian was the longest-serving Minister for Magic in history, becoming minister at the age of 109. Ferrus Spavian was born in 1756, meaning this old man was also over 200 years old. Rove sighed. No wonder he didn't care about Newt. Compared to this man, Dumbledore was a young man. Child, how is that basilisk? The old man suddenly asked in a Parsleyan voice. Ralph looked confused. No need to hide it anymore, the old man sniffed and hissed in his Parsleyan voice. I can smell a familiar scent on you, a scent I haven't smelled in almost 200 years. It's a bit nostalgic, Ralph asked incredulously. Who are you? My name is, the old man said calmly, Covenus Gaunt. Chapter 308 Where is my gallon? Wizards far outlive muggles in terms of lifespan. Nicholas Flamel, needless to say, despite having held his own funeral multiple times and having exhausted the magic of the Philosopher's Stone, is still alive and kicking. Compared to the Dark Lord, who claims to conquer death, it's hard to say who will die first. Headmaster Armando Dippert is over 300 years old. He was born before the Changzhen Emperor hanged himself on the old crooked tree on Coal Hill. Ferrus Spavian was 109 when he became minister, and then served for another 38 years, outliving several deputy ministers. Therefore, a wizard claiming to be born in the 18th century, after experiencing Nicholas's funeral, doesn't even bat an eye at Ralph. Only 200 years old? What's so surprising about that? If the four great wizards suddenly appeared, jumped in front of Ralph, and said, "Hey kid, we're still alive," that would indeed shock Ralph. Therefore, Ralph was shocked, but not by the old man's age, but by his name. Corvinus Gaunt. The Gaunt family, descendants of Slytherin, possessed the ability to speak Parsley and were renowned throughout the wizarding world. However, after Voldemort's uncle, Morfin Gaunt, died in Azkaban, the wizarding world generally believed that this ancient family was extinct. but unexpectedly, one survivor remained. Ralph was actually quite familiar with the name Corvinus Glunt, as he had heard the basilisk mention it many times. Corvinus discovered a chamber of secrets even before Voldemort, but unlike Tom, he didn't release the basilisk to attack the students. Instead, he built a complex system of pipes to conceal the entrance. Ralph was extremely interested in Corvinus Glunt, but he never expected to have the opportunity to meet him one day, especially in the Department of Mysteries. However, even knowing he was Corvinus Glunt didn't help much with his application. It was rejected again. The boy quickly led Sherry and the others out of the office and, following Professor McGonagall's instructions, found the exit of the Department of Mysteries, eventually returning safely to the Ministry of Magic's main hall. The hall was bustling with wizards, but the reporters had already dispersed. Ralph and his friends didn't go home. Instead, they used the Ministry of Magic's fireplace to head to Diagon Alley to buy items needed for the start of school. There were many items to buy, and traveling together would be too inefficient, so they split into two groups and agreed to meet at the bookstore. Hermione went to the magical beasts shop. She wanted to buy an owl as a birthday present. Tonks followed, and with her protection, security was not a problem. As the two disappeared into the crowd, Shirley asked, "Where do we go next?" "Let's go to Gringotts to get some money," Ralph stretched comfortably, jokingly adding, "If we don't get the money soon, I won't be able to pay your salary." Shirley blushed slightly, glancing at the boy who was complaining about being poor, then lowered her head and whispered, "I can pay you later. I'm not in a hurry, a good employee as considerate as you." Ralph smiled. "Shirley, after you graduate and get another job, if you encounter a heartless boss, won't you be owed wages for life?" "I'm not afraid." The girl with the ponytail raised her head, her usually cold demeanor unusually sweet, and said, "Ralph, I can always be your assistant, that way I won't encounter a heartless boss." The boy flicked Shirley's smooth forehead with his finger, teasingly asking, "What if I become a heartless boss?" The girl with the ponytail picked up the black suitcase in her hand, blinking her beautiful eyes, and said, "Then I'll take your suitcase to pay off my debt." "Oh dear, they've already got their eyes on my suitcase." Ralph feigned annoyance, pretending to hide her. "I think you're the real scoundrel." Sherry ran forward, then suddenly turned back, her eyes smiling, and said softly, "A heartless boss and a scoundrel employee, it's fate that we've ended up together." Ralph and Sherry bickered and soon arrived at Gringotts. In any city, banks and tobacco companies are always located in the most prime locations, and this is no exception in the wizarding world. Gringotts, located in the very center of Diagon Alley, is the oldest building in Diagon Alley, and all the other shops are built around it. The entire building is extremely luxurious, a Byzantine-style high-rise towering on the street, with a large dome in the center. The top of the dome is made of pure gold, gleaming in the sunlight, its gleam visible from miles away. Ralph and Sherry walked up the steps, and a goblin in a scarlet, gold-trimmed uniform bowed and then welcomed them into the hall. Gringotts' main hall was even more luxurious, with gilded marble pillars supporting a dome, and walls covered with intricate patterns made of stained glass inlaid with gemstones. About 100 goblins sat on high stools behind a long counter, some weighing coins on bronze scales, others examining gemstones with eyepieces, hastily recording transactions in a large ledger. Ralph, leading Sherry, walked towards an idle goblin. They sat down, and the boy took a key from his pocket, saying, "I need to go to the vault to get some galleons." "No problem." The goblin carefully examined the key, then rang the bell in front of it, whispering, "Gula will take you to the vault." Soon, a goblin named Gula appeared, leading them to a door guarded by two sphinx sculptures weighing over 10 tons each. Gula opened the door, revealing a narrow stone corridor illuminated by burning torches. The corridor descended a steep slope, with a small railway running below. Gula whistled, and a small cart rushed towards them along the railway tracks. Gula sat in the front, with Ralph and Sherry in the back, and the cart began to descend the tracks like a roller coaster. But it ended after a few dozen seconds. The cart suddenly stopped in front of a small door. "It's over so quickly?" Sherry asked, expecting it to last several minutes. "Because my vault is too cheap," Ralph whispered. "The more expensive vaults are deeper inside." Eula unlocked the door, and a plume of smoke billowed out. When the smoke cleared, a small room was revealed, filled with a considerable amount of gallon. "We need to stay inside for a while," Ralph said softly. "Could you stay outside?" "Of course, sir," the fairy replied respectfully. Ralph and Sherry went into the vault and closed the door again. Actually, the boy hadn't come to withdraw money, but to deposit it. Ralph grinned, opened his trunk, and pulled out a large cabinet. He patted the cabinet and said smugly, "Shirley, I made quite a few galleons on my trip to America on the Mayflower." The boy quickly opened the cabinet door, and Shirley leaned closer. After a moment, she looked up, her expression strange, and asked, "Are you sure this is the cabinet?" Ralph peered in suspiciously and froze. The cabinet was completely empty. "Damn it, where are my galleons?" Chapter 309 Rolf, Sherry, my swordsmanship is unparalleled. Ralph lifted the heavy safe and discovered a hole in the bottom, its edges marked with deep claw marks. Black fur drifted down from the safe. Sherry bent down, picked it up, and held it in her hand, forcing a laugh. "Ralph, I found the thief," she said. Ralph stared at the fur, then gritted his teeth and muttered, "Niffler, that wretched Niffler." The boy opened his black leather suitcase and jumped inside, Sherry following closely behind. Once inside, Ralph came to a lawn. He waved his wand, and the entire lawn began to ripple, tearing off the ground to reveal interconnected underground caverns. The caverns were filled with glittering galleons. A Niffler lay supine in the middle, half submerged in gold, its four paws paddling in turn. It looked as if it were swimming leisurely in the galleons. Another Niffler sat in a gallon, wearing a gold headdress, its body round and plump, constantly stuffing gallons into its already bulging belly. Sherry and Rove stood side by side, watching the little creatures, caught red-handed and panicked, and she smiled, saying, "Verbal reprimands, standing in the corner, and withholding treats. We've tried everything. What should we do with them this time?" "Confiscate all their possessions," Rove said fiercely. "All the gallons, the shiny metal, the toys, not even a bottle cap. Isn't that a bit too harsh?" The girl blinked. "Sherry," the boy reminded her, "your salary for the next 10 years or so is all in these stolen gallons." The girl with the ponytail immediately straightened her face and said seriously, "Then they must be severely punished." Rove snapped his fingers, and a bunch of vines shot up, coiling towards the fleeing Nifflers. Sherry jumped into the pit, grabbed a Niffler, flipped it head first, and shook it vigorously by its hind legs. A huge pile of gold cascaded down, its sheer quantity astonishing. The Niffler sat on the ground, wailing and sobbing, its tiny paws gripping the girl's trouser leg, its cries heart-wrenching. Ralph walked over and kicked the Niffler's sturdy bottom with a beautiful, powerful kick, sending it tumbling into a hole. 10 minutes later, Ralph and Sherry returned the counted galleons to the vault. 700 galleons are still missing, Ralph sighed. The loss was too great. This was why he hadn't put the galleons in his own chest. The Niffler could easily steal them all, day and night, but the Nifflers are hard to guard against. They're born for this. Fairies even raise Nifflers specifically to burrow underground and search for gold mines, more effective than radar. Ralph piled the gold on the ground, a full 20,000 galleons, filling half the vault. This was his private treasury, unrelated to the Scamander family. Some of the money came from Lockhart, who fell into the Black Lake last year, married a mermaid, and had a relationship with her. Ralph learned of this when he went to rescue Lockhart. Lockhart, fearing Ralph would expose the affair and damage his career, gave the boy several thousand gallons as hush money. Another portion came from Helen, who captured Misera and sold her for 7,000 gallons, and she herself carried several thousand more. So, as the saying goes, no one gets rich without windfall gains, and no one gets fat without a gold mine. The ancients were right. Ralph squatted on the ground, rummaging through a pile of Native American ornaments, finally picking out an item. He stood up and said softly, "I brought you many gifts from America. This is yours." Sherry's eyes widened as she stared at the short sword, saying in a soft voice, "A sword made of dragon glass by the Native Americans." Ralph nodded slightly, turning the hilt so the girl could examine the deep black luster of the blade. Rove acquired 2 dragon crystal weapons from the Native American tribe, a short sword from Dana and a dagger from a creeper. The creeper was over 2 meters tall, making the dagger and short sword seem large and heavy to him. Therefore, Rove had Dana reforge the weapon, turning it into the appropriately sized short sword he had today. Rove placed the sword in Sherry's palm, instructing her on how to hold it, then stepped back and asked, "How does it feel? Is it comfortable?" Sherry grasped the dragon crystal short sword. It felt cool to the touch, entirely black, with a texture as smooth as frozen mutton fat. The girl with the ponytail smiled, her eyes crinkling. She gently stroked the blade with her fingertips, looking down as she said, "It's very comfortable. I like it. This isn't a toy, It's as sharp as a weapon forged by fairies, Rove carefully cautioned. Be careful not to hurt yourself. I know, Sherry nodded like a chick pecking at rice. I'm taking you to the Forbidden Forest this semester, so you'll have to practice your swordsmanship diligently, Ralph said earnestly. Many times, when dealing with magical creatures, especially those with extremely strong defenses, a sword is more useful than a wand. Sherry's face lit up with excitement. She had suggested going to the Forbidden Forest with Ralph several times, but he had always refused. This time, she finally had the chance. The girl was already looking forward to that day. She knew the Forbidden Forest was dangerous, but far from being afraid, she was filled with anticipation. However, a layer of doubt quickly appeared on Sherry's face as she asked, "Who should I learn swordsmanship from?" "Learn from me." Ralph produced a short sword, twirling it around before finally saying, "My swordsmanship is top-notch, I'll show you. The first lesson is to use the pointed end to pierce the enemy." "Yes, Scamander." "Professor." Sherry tentatively thrust forward, then involuntarily laughed like a child. Ralph beckoned, signaling the girl to attack. "Then watch out." Sherry gripped the dragon crystal short sword with both hands and charged towards Ralph. The boy gracefully dodged, waving his short knife and easily disarming her. Sherry was too fast and lost her balance, staggering forward. The girl thought she was going to fall to the ground, but suddenly an arm wrapped around her slender waist from behind. Ralph gently embraced Sherry, pulling her to her feet. He quickly released her, taking a step back. "How are you?" he asked. The girl with the ponytail blushed, quickly bending down to pick up the sword from the ground. "I'll work even harder," she said, bowing her head. "You do need to work harder, or I'll fire you." Ralph smiled. "Someone's eyeing your assistant position, that little girl named Gabrielle." Sherry looked up, pursing her bright red lips. "I won't give her a chance," she said confidently. "I'll definitely get stronger and stronger, stronger than her, and her sister Fuller combined." Ralph habitually reached out to touch Sherry's ponytail, but she surprisingly slapped his hand away. The girl with the ponytail blushed deeply, glaring at him. "You hurt me when you were teaching me swordsmanship," she said. Chapter 310 Fire Arrows and Galleon Coupons. Ralph and Sherry dawdled for over half an hour before finally leaving the vault. Groudon, the goblin waiting at the door, nearly thought something had happened to them. It wasn't unheard of. The most famous example was old Trumbull, who always suspected someone of stealing his gold, so he sprayed poisonous fog into the vault. After old Trumbull died, his son inherited the estate, but young Trumbull was unaware of the poisonous fog and went into the vault alone. By the time the goblins realized something was wrong, he was already dead. After leaving Gringotts, Ralph and Sherry first went to the apothecary to replenish their medicine, then to the Wizard magical supplies shop to buy the scales, crystal balls, and other teaching materials needed for the new school term. By the time they arrived at Flower and Blots, an hour had passed. Hermione was standing in the corner, holding a copy of Seeing the Future Through the Fog, reading with a furrowed brow. She looked up at Ralph and Sherry, who had rushed over, and frowned. "Where have you been? Why did it take you so long?" "We were delayed at Gringotts for a while." Ralph's gaze drifted down, catching sight of a ginger cat in Hermione's arms. It had thick, fluffy fur, a face that looked like it had been flattened by a steamroller, and a short, thick, fluffy tail that resembled a beer bottle. "Hermione, is this your new pet?" Sherry asked curiously, staring at the cat. "Yes, its name is Crookshanks. Weren't you going to buy an owl? But I suddenly changed my mind. I think this guy is cuter." "I fell in love with him at first sight." Hermione smiled and exclaimed, "It's for his beautiful, isn't it?" Ralph raised an eyebrow. He didn't think the words cute and beautiful were appropriate for Crookshanks. After all, they were positive words, not negative ones. It's not that it's unusable, but it always gives off a sarcastic vibe. It's like if Professor Snape suddenly praised Harry and Ron for their exceptional talent in potions. That's definitely not a compliment. Of course, Ralph couldn't say Crookshanks was ugly. It's like when facing a girl, a beautiful girl will be praised as stunningly beautiful, someone not so pretty will be praised as extremely attractive, someone truly ugly will at least be described as elegant and graceful. So, not wanting to dampen Hermione's enthusiasm, the boy could only nod and agree. "Crookshanks does look very unique." Crookshanks tilted its head slightly, its almond-shaped eyes fixed on Ralph, seemingly sensing his lie. Cats have this special talent. They can notice suspicious and untrustworthy people, even detect animagus. And Crookshanks also has cat blood. But Ralph wasn't lying. Ugly, but uniquely ugly. That's uniquely ugly. The boy quickly pulled out a few cat treats, and Crookshanks, with its yellow eyes wide, finally couldn't resist the temptation and licked one. Ralph took the opportunity to pet Crookshank. Although it was ugly, the feel of it was undeniably comfortable. In his years of experience petting cats, it was top-notch. Professor McGonagall, on the other hand, wasn't as good, perhaps due to age. She had lost too much collagen, and her skin was somewhat loose. Suddenly, a ding sounded in Ralph's mind. Detected a domesticated mixed-breed cat, triggering side quest 1, help the single Crookshank reproduce, reward magic, eye of justice, keen intuition, able to detect suspicious people and determine if someone is lying. Side quest 2, 100% taming of Crookshank, reward magic, frenzied scratching, can grow nails to launch swift scratching attacks, wounds of the attacked are difficult to heal in a short time, incomplete. Ralph glanced at the quests. The first reward was somewhat useful, although it was just intuition, and sometimes inaccurate, but as long as a problem was detected, it was definitely accurate. But, did Hogwarts have breeding female cats? Huh, Mrs. Lawrence? Or maybe a cross-species? Toothpick, Hermione and Sherry hugged Crookshanks and started petting him. The action instructions are similar to Ralph petting Professor McGonagall. After a while, Ralph asked, "Have you bought the books?" "There's still one book we haven't bought." Hermione looked up and said softly, "That book is dangerous." The group walked towards a corner of the bookstore, where there was a large iron cage containing about 100 copies of the Monster Book of Monsters. The books were locked together, engaged in a furious wrestling match, biting and fighting fiercely, with torn pages flying everywhere. A staff member hurriedly came forward and asked, "Are you here to buy them?" "Yes," Ralph nodded and said, "3 books." Hearing that he wanted 3 monster books, the staff member almost collapsed. He had already been bitten several times. The staff member put on a thick pair of gloves, picked up a thick, knotted cane, and walked towards the iron cage containing the Monster Book of Monsters. He lowered his cane into the cage as if fishing, and immediately a monster book bit into it, only to be pulled out. The staff member retrieved 3 books, but a problem arose with a third. A loud tearing sound came from inside the cage. 2 of the Monster Books of Monsters grabbed the third and tore it apart. "Stop! Stop!" the staff member shouted, reaching the cane through the bars to open the books. They seized the opportunity, biting the cane and escaping. The monster books fell to the ground, darting away like snakes, crashing into the shelves throughout the bookstore. One book bit Hermione, and Crookshanks immediately leaped down, growling angrily at the monster book and slapping it with his claws. Ralph also stepped on a monster book, twisting it fiercely with his toes. The boy used considerable force, but the monster book didn't cry out. Instead, it trembled, seemingly enjoying it. Damn, this book is so cheesy. Looking at the monster book's opening and closing mouth, Ralph suddenly had a bold idea. After a bit of commotion, the group left Flower and Blots and enjoyed ice cream in front of Florin's ice cream shop. Not far away, Ralph also saw a group of wizards gathered around, watching the newly released flying broomsticks. Firebolts. Firebolts were great in every way, from their looks to their speed, but the price was too high. Not everyone could afford them. In this respect, the Nimbus series was much better. Although last year they released the Nimbus 2001, which was considered a ripoff, with performance improvements as slow as toothpaste, drawing criticism from many. At least it was cheap, and everyone could afford it if they gritted their teeth. Ralph, along with Sherry and Hermione, watched for a while and even got a firebolt for 5 galleons. Did he really need those 5 galleons? If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 311 Attack. As evening fell, Ralph brought Sherry and Hermione home. To avoid hurting each other, they had a pleasant dinner out before coming back. Given that British food, aside from potatoes, is generally considered terrible, the 3 went to an Italian restaurant, which was indeed very good, so much so that they were all quite full. Back home, Hermione slumped onto the sofa, saying comfortably, I'm so full tonight." "You ate a bowl of spaghetti, a smoked sausage omelette, a plate of cod, and Basque cheesecake," Ralph teased. "How could you not be full after eating so much?" "Of course I have to eat more since you treated me," Hermione accidentally let out a burp, rubbing her stomach rather unladylike, and shaking her head. Tomorrow. I know an even more expensive and better restaurant, Ralph sighed. But I'm broke, Ralph. I can lend you some, Sherry said, turning to the boy with a smile as she brewed hawthorn tea. But there will be interest. I borrow your money, pay you interest, and then use it to treat you two to dinner? Ralph pointed to himself, unable to suppress a laugh. Do I look like a sucker? The girl with the ponytail walked over with a cup, handed the tea to the boy, and said seriously, anyway, I'm stuck with you. Ralph took the teacup, his face full of sorrow, and said, meeting you two is truly bad luck. The boy took a small sip of hawthorn tea, raised his eyebrows, and said, it's not sour this time. Sherry's pretty face flushed slightly. The hawthorn tea she brewed last time had almost made Ralph's teeth ache from the sourness. The girl smiled and said, I specially added honey this time. Hermione jumped off the sofa, barefoot, and hopped to the television. She quickly found a disc, raised her arm, and announced, we're watching this tonight. Hermione wanted to watch a classic horror movie, A Nightmare on Elm Street. A while ago, when it was just her and Sherry at home, neither of them dared to watch it. Now that Ralph was here to keep things in check, she had become bolder. However, during the movie, the two girls still huddled fearfully in the corner of the sofa, occasionally clinging to each other's arms and letting out screams. Ralph sat in the middle of the sofa and suggested, I have a lot of yang energy, you two can hold on to my arms, then you won't be afraid. He was immediately met with a relentless attack from the cushions. Halfway through the story, Crookshanks, who was lying on the sofa, suddenly bristled. Sniffing the air, it bared its teeth and growled softly. Hermione petted Crookshanks, asking curiously, what's wrong, Crookshanks? Ralph silently looked up, narrowed his eyes, glanced at the now completely dark window outside, and whispered, go into my box. No matter what happens, don't come out. A wizard's here. Sherry drew her wand. Yes, someone touched a magical creature I left outside. Ralph quickly opened the box and said, go in quickly. After the two entered the box, Ralph remained seated on the sofa. A moment later, the door creaked open, and a witch walked in. Ralph turned around, a slight smile on his face. Excuse me, is there anything I can help you with? The woman gazed at Ralph, her eyes sparkling with desire, her face flushed with a sweet smile. Sir, you've ordered the in-home service package. Me. Ralph shook his head, a hint of surprise in his voice. You must be mistaken. No mistake, aren't you Ralph Scamander? The witch entered the room, her figure swaying like a surging wave. She said in a coquettish voice, Sir, I've seen your picture in the newspaper, but you're even more handsome in real life. Never mind, I won't charge you. Pull out your wand. I'll give you a free massage tonight. Auntie, how old are you? Still doing this? Ralph laughed. 50? 60? This is a job that relies on youth. You're old enough to be a grandmother. Don't you ever consider changing careers? The witch took a deep breath. Sorry, Auntie, I'm not good with words, Ralph said with a gentle smile. But please leave. Even if you offered me money, I wouldn't let a lady your age come for treatment. The witch brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, gave Ralph a cold glance, and said with a smile, You little brat, I'll use you to make wine later. Enough. Fanny. Another wizard entered. He was brown-skinned, his cheeks and chin covered by a short, thick, gray-white beard. Deep wrinkles and several scars adorned his face, making him look menacing. A honey trap, Ralph chuckled. You've come in too early. This auntie and I haven't even gotten to the point yet. The man laughed, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. My name is Gibbon, a Death Eater. Ralph narrowed his eyes. He recognized the name, the infamous Death Eater. After Voldemort's downfall, not everyone ended up in Azkaban. Some, like Malfoy, were exonerated and escaped punishment. Others, the Death Eaters, fled and have yet to be apprehended. Gibbon was one of them. Did Peter Pettigrew send you? Ralph asked the man. Peter Pettigrew, Gibbon scoffed. No, although we both worked for the Dark Lord, I'm not familiar with him, and I wasn't the one who abducted him. Don't pin that blame on me. Then what are you doing here without permission? Ralph asked. We're bounty hunters now, decent people diligently earning our money with wands. Gibbon shrugged. Oh, well, decent people is a matter of opinion. Anyway, someone's putting a bounty on you in Nocturne Alley. Your head is worth 10,000 galleons. Only 10,000 galleons? That's a huge insult to me, Ralph shouted. I'm a magizoologist, a veterinarian, and even have some knowledge of gynecology. Fine, fine, I'll offer 20,000 galleons for my life, how about it? The boy's words undoubtedly amused Gibbon, whose thin lips twisted into a sinister smile. But rumors say the Philosopher's Stone is in your possession. You don't believe everything you hear. Ralph smiled. Nico Flamel said the Philosopher's Stone was destroyed. Why would he give it to a boy like me? But you appeared at his funeral. You two seem to have a special relationship. Gibbon's eyes scrutinized Ralph like a talking viper. That doesn't mean anything. Rove shook his head. So there's no room for negotiation? Gibbon laughed loudly. We'll talk again once you've ripped off your head. Fanny raised her wand, gently shaking her wrist, ready to unleash her power. Just then, the window was smashed open, and a tall man rushed in. The man was shirtless, with thick arms and muscular shoulders, and a thick, dark chest covered in hair, making him look like a wild beast. Fenrir Greyback. Rove stared at the man. Boy, have you seen me before? Greyback grinned. No, I haven't seen you before, but my grandfather mentioned you. Rove narrowed his eyes. Oh, what did Scamander say? My grandfather said, every word you utter reeks of disgust. Gibbon suddenly shouted. Kill him. A green light flashed, followed by a shout that pierced the night. Avada Kedavra. Chapter 312 Auntie, you promised to maintain my wand. A flash of green light streaked past. Ralph didn't dodge. Instead, he held the cup with 2 fingers of his right hand and tossed it lightly, a casual gesture, like tossing away trash. The teacup, however, landed precisely in the path of the green light, struck by the spell and shattering. This move was incredibly daring, considering Avada Kedavra was a death sentence if it grazed him. If Ralph had misjudged, even a slight deviation would have resulted in his being hit. How much confidence and madness must one possess to make such a bold move? But then, Ralph showed them what true madness was. Before the shards even hit the ground, another green light flashed, and the boy shifted his feet slightly, swaying left and right, narrowly dodging 2 more Avada Kedavra attacks. Gibbon rubbed his eyes. Ralph's movements weren't particularly large. He had almost thought the boy hadn't moved at all. But the slightly rippling strands of hair at Ralph's sideburns proved that he had indeed moved. Gibbon's snake-like eyes were filled with disbelief. He had never seen a wizard so easily deflect a killing curse with mere snake-like movements. What kind of reaction speed was that? Even the Dark Lord couldn't do that. Of course, the Dark Lord didn't need to dodge. His enemies always died when they clashed with him. After all, his spells were too powerful. Ralph glanced at the shattered television behind him and reminded him, since you came in, you've broken glass, cups, and the television. You'll have to pay for all of these at their original price. The boy's mocking tone and overly dismissive attitude enraged Fenrir Greyback, who cursed, this kid's standing right there, and you can't even hit him? Are you both fucking idiots? Gibbon straightened his face, raised his wand high, and chanted a series of spells. This time, threads of light, sharp as blades, appeared in the air. They crisscrossed the air, chaotic and disorderly, like dozens of powerful arrows fired in rapid succession, enveloping Rove. This time, dodging was futile against that dense attack. Rove waved his wand, and the sofa at his feet floated up, shielding the boy. He reached out and touched it, whispering, "Stone transformation." The magic from the petrifying lizard instantly transformed the sofa into a solid boulder. The threads collided, cutting and scraping the stone with a harsh noise. The boulder was torn apart, cracks appearing, and then the entire sofa was shredded into hundreds and thousands of pieces. But they didn't fall to the ground. As Rove raised his wand, the fragments rained down on Gibbon and the others. "Protect your body." Fanny raised her wand, and the fragments fell like hail onto the shield, bouncing off harmlessly. Rove seized the opportunity to turn and jump out of the window, leaving the house. If the fighting continued, they'd demolish Hermione's house. He was a bodyguard, not a demolition expert. Besides, as Hermione's classmate, Ralph had a decent impression on the Grangers. He even wanted to come for free dental care in the future. He'd already torn down their house. What was the point of him coming back? That kid ran out the window, Fenrir Greyback shouted. He can't escape. Gibbon chuckled coldly. Go after him. The 3 of them stepped out of the house and quickly saw Ralph, who was standing by the roadside, seemingly waiting for them leisurely. Seeing them appear, Ralph raised his wand, aimed it at the fire hydrant beside him, and said, "Thunder explosion." An explosion rang out, the red fire hydrant shot into the sky, and then a jet of water gushed out. Ralph was soaked to the bone, water droplets dripping from his hair. A smile played on the boy's lips, but his eyes were icy cold. Water dragon assault. Ralph lightly stomped his foot, and the water jet condensed into a water dragon, leaping high beside him before swiftly attacking. Gibbon's eyes widened in horror. In his vision, a gigantic water dragon hurtled towards him at breakneck speed. Its body was incredibly long, seemingly endless, continuously spewing forth from the fire hydrant. This was only 13. That water dragon transformation alone was beyond the capabilities of a young wizard. No wonder there was a bounty of 10,000 galleons on its head. Gibbon quickly raised his wand, summoning a shield in front of him. However, when the water dragon crashed into the blindingly bright shield, it shattered instantly, cracking in several places. Gibbon apparated to distance, the water dragon relentlessly pursuing him. It roared down, crashing into the ground, carving a deep trench. The entire neighborhood trembled, kicking up clouds of dust. Gibbon, constantly dodging the water dragon's attacks, shouted, "You two, stop standing there like idiots." Fanny glared at Fenrir Greybuck and said viciously, "It's all your fault for taking this job." "The hardest money I've ever made." Fenrir Greybuck glanced at the cloud-covered sky and grinned maliciously. "How was I supposed to know this gallon was so hot to handle? Once I catch this kid, I'm going to bite him." No sooner had Fenrir Greybuck finished speaking than his massive figure appeared less than a meter in front of Ralph. He roared as he charged, the air crackling with the sound of thunder. Ralph tilted his head, dodging the punch, then spread his arms, fists aimed at his temples. Solar fist, oops, dazzling flash. Ralph's eyes blazed with a blinding white light. Greybuck's vision went completely white. He couldn't see anything. Rove dodged Greybuck's punch again, pressed his hand on Greybuck's shoulder, slightly increasing the pressure, and said in a deep voice, "Azure Prison." Water from the fire hydrant surged up, forming a water cocoon that enveloped Greybuck, like a water prison. Rove turned to Fanny, who was also blind, and was randomly casting spells. Suddenly, the boy grabbed the witch's wrist and then pinned her down from behind, immobilizing her. He whispered in the woman's ear, "Auntie, what about maintaining my wand?" That gentle voice almost chilled Fanny to the bone. Her face changed drastically, and she cried out in horror, "Gibbon, save me!" Rove gripped Fanny's wrist, twisted it violently, and broke it. Then, he delivered a knee strike to Fanny's waist, her body contorting in pain. The boy raised his wand, and the tip transformed into a whip, which wrapped around the woman's neck. Fanny knelt on the ground, her fingers digging into the whip, struggling to breathe, letting out barely audible screams. "Auntie, I'm giving you a chance to live," Ralph whispered. "Where's the Auror who's protecting us?" Tonks was on duty during the day, and she returned to the Ministry of Magic in the evening. There should be other Aurors taking over and protecting them nearby. But Ralph hadn't seen him. He was eaten by Fenrir Greyback. Ralph bent down and stroked Fanny's cheeks, which were flushed red from suffocation. He said gently, "Then I'll have to send you to repair his wand." Fanny opened her mouth to speak, but her expression froze, because her head had been petrified. Ralph kicked out, sending the stone head flying off his shoulder. It rolled a long way, dripping with blood, and finally stopped not far from the werewolf Fenrir Greyback. The sight of the corpse lying dead on the ground gave Greyback a strange feeling, like willow catkins drifting in the air. Rove looked at Fenrir Greyback, pursed his thin lips, and smiled slightly. "Don't rush, it's your turn." Chapter 313 Slaughtering Werewolves. Rove approached Fenrir Greyback, ready to kill the werewolf. Greyback was arguably the most ferocious werewolf in England, whose mission was to bite and infect as many people as possible, creating a massive army of werewolves to defeat wizards. He particularly enjoyed attacking children, but instead of killing them, he would turn them into werewolves. Lupin was a victim of Greyback's machinations. But just then, someone in the distance clapped softly and said, "Impressive, impressive, Rove Scamander, you can't be killed even with this." Rove looked up and saw a wizard of average height standing on a distant rooftop, his entire body shrouded in a robe, his face obscured. Rove leaned back slightly and squinted. "Are you in cahoots?" "No, I'm the wizard who put the bounty on you." The man lowered his voice. "I'm also the one who rescued Peter Pettigrew." The boy's blue eyes suddenly sharpened. He smiled and said, "Since you're already here, why hide like a coward? Are you so ashamed to be seen?" Before he finished speaking, the water from the fire hydrant condensed into a water jet, rushing towards the wizard on the roof. The hooded wizard vanished, his phantom reappearing in a safer distance. He raised his wand and said in a deep voice, Scamander, your opponent tonight isn't me. Whirlwind. After casting his spell, the hooded wizard seemed afraid that Ralph would pursue him and immediately disappeared from the spot. A raging wind rushed towards him. Ralph, swept up by the hurricane, stood motionless, only his sleeves fluttering in the wind. The boy suddenly looked up at the sky. The dark clouds that had covered the sky were blown away by the strong wind, revealing a full moon. In the dead of night, under a bright, clear full moon, Rove suddenly remembered that it was a full moon. He abruptly looked at Greyback, trapped in the water sphere. Bathed in moonlight, Greyback's body suddenly swelled, his height and width increasing by 2/3. His once loose trousers suddenly became too tight and then taller. Thick hair rapidly grew on Greyback's limbs, chest, and face, and the displaced bones and stretched tendons beneath the fur crackled and popped. Rove raised his arm, and the water sphere floated up. As the boy clenched his fist, the water prison began to contract, the immense water pressure squeezing the werewolf in the water. At that moment, Greyback felt as if he were in a vat of boiling oil, suffering excruciating torment. He roared loudly, frantically trying to break free of the water sphere. Greyback's body continued to change, his limbs twisted due to the deformation, his legs became even stronger, and his nails transformed into long, ferocious claws. The surface of the enormous emerald green water sphere finally emitted a barely audible cracking sound, and then, Greyback broke free of the water prison. He lay low on the ground, his ears becoming narrow and long, his snout stretching forward and merging into a single, gaping maw of sharp teeth. Greyback had completely transformed into a giant wolf. Ah! Greyback howled to the sky, his wolfish howl seemingly piercing the deep night. Ralph looked into Greyback's eyes, intending to use the basilisk's magic, but the dazzling flash had alerted him. Greyback's deep brown eyes, the most human feature on his beastly body, were now tightly closed. His eyes weren't open. But Greyback's keen sense of smell allowed him to pinpoint Ralph's location with a twitch of his nostrils. Ralph flew into the sky, his spider sense, aided by the eight-eyed giant spider's senses, already aware of the danger. In fact, no warning was needed. After transforming into a wolf, Greyberry's enormous size was almost the size of a giant bear, clearly indicating extreme danger. Rove flew towards the sky, but Greyberry's speed was illogical, covering a distance of over 10 meters in a mere second. Then, Greyberry leaped into the air, pouncing on the boy. Rove had only reached about 3 meters in the air when Greyberry bit his ankle hard, pulling him back to the ground. Rove's entire body flew backward, crashing onto the grass, tumbling as Greyberry pounced, his wolfish jaws wide open, revealing sharp teeth, and grabbing the boy's neck. He wanted to drink his fill of blood. Greyberry's sharp teeth could easily tear through anyone's skin, but unexpectedly, he didn't taste Scamander's flesh. Rove's skin had turned silver gray, like dragon scales, and no matter how Greyberry's teeth tore, they couldn't penetrate it. Greyback shifted his position, biting at Rove's arm, then suddenly dragged him forward. Rove's shoes had fallen off, his bare feet scraping against the grass, carving 2 furrows in the ground. A dragon crystal dagger appeared in the boy's hand. He swung it wildly, stabbing it into Greyback's forepaw. The wolf's highly defensive pelt was easily pierced by the dagger. Rove pulled out the dagger, blood splattering onto his face like warm rain. It was Greyback's wolf blood. Rove again gripped the dagger with one hand, desperately trying to plunge it into the wolf's head. Greyback sensed the danger, quickly releasing the boy and roaring as he retreated. His leg was slashed, causing him to limp. Rove staggered to his feet, his face covered in blood, slightly hunched over, biting the hilt of the dagger with his teeth, his gaze fixed straight ahead. The boy tore off his tattered shirt, revealing a silver-gray chest. He used the rag to wipe the blood and dust from the corners of his eyes. As Ralph gripped the dragon crystal dagger again, he beckoned and laughed contemptuously. "Come here." Greyback lowered his head, glanced at his bleeding forepaws, and roared, but his bestial instincts quickly overcame the pain, and he lunged forward. Vines instantly sprouted from the ground, dozens of roots twisting and constricting him, tripping him. Greyback spun and crashed to the ground, rolling repeatedly, kicking up clouds of dust. Ralph, like a leopard hunting in the night, appeared beside Greyback in the blink of an eye, dagger in hand. Unable to slide tackle now, the boy leaped onto Greyback's back, the dagger in his hand, the tip piercing the soft fur of the nape of his neck. Ralph pressed his entire body against the dagger, driving the tip deeper until the entire blade was embedded in Greyback's body. Greyback arched his back, howling in pain, his claws scratching wildly, and Ralph was thrown off balance. But the water caught him, giving the boy ample cushioning. Ralph landed on the ground, slowly walked towards Greyback, then raised his head to confront the werewolf as tall as a small mountain. He stood on tiptoe and drew his dagger. Warm blood dripped slowly from the tip of the blade to the ground. Then, Greyback collapsed like a mountain. This book, I'm Hermione's Little Puppy at Hogwarts, is a new book by the author. A veteran author, so the quality is guaranteed. Those who like it can check it out. Synopsis: Dumbledore, lover, you should know the consequences of your actions, right, lover Grindelwald. Lover is just a little wolf. Lover doesn't know that. This is the story of a wolf cub raised by Dumbledore, but surnamed Grindelwald, and bound to Hermione by a contract. He is the last Forbidden Forest wolf in the Hogwarts Forbidden Forest. Though its body is wolf-like, its intelligence rivals that of a human. What will happen if this little wolf unintentionally transforms into a human? What changes will it bring to the wizarding world? Lovell Grindelwald, Malfoy, listen up. My dad was the first Dark Lord, my mom was the most powerful white wizard, the headmaster of Gryffindor caught mice with me, I can poop in other professors' laps, and you're talking about Snape? He's my poop scooper. You think you can compare your background to mine? All the professors, fuck, Lovell Grindelwald, Hermione, save me. Chapter 314 Shirley, Ralph, let me give you a checkup. Wearing a mask and gloves, Ralph swiftly dissected the werewolf's corpse with a knife. At his feet lay numerous vials filled with various kinds of blood. Nearby, several Aurors who had arrived some time earlier surrounded him, all staring at Ralph. Their faces and eyes were identical. That was fear. Fear of the boy. Scrimgeour, the Auror chief of staff, was the only wizard standing beside Ralph. He examined the corpse while observing the boy. His focused, single-minded dissection of the werewolf's body was remarkably calm, unlike that of a 13-year-old. His composure was terrifying. The Scamanders are all monsters, including Newt. Minister Fudge slowly approached, followed by Umbridge. He stopped before even touching the werewolf's corpse, as if afraid of getting his hands dirty with blood and turning himself into a werewolf. Fudge covered his nose and asked in a thick nasal voice, Rufus, what do you say? Scrimgeour turned and walked towards Fudge, whispering, Minister, the identity has been confirmed. The dead werewolf is Fenrir Greyback. Hearing the familiar name, Fudge was initially terrified, but quickly his face lit up with elation. Are you sure it's him? Fenrir Greyback was a notorious werewolf who had committed countless crimes. The Ministry of Magic had been hunting him relentlessly, but without success. He never expected him to die here. Announcing Greyback's death would instantly reverse the Ministry of Magic's negative image after Peter's escape. But Fudge quickly added, puzzled, how did Greyback end up here? Someone put a bounty on Scamander in Nocturne Alley, and Greyback came to attack him, Scrimgeour explained. Fanny Ardham was Greyback's accomplice, and her body was found nearby. The Auror chief of staff hesitated for a moment before continuing, both were killed by Scamander. Fudge stared at Scrimgeour incredulously, as if he were speaking a completely foreign language. You mean, Ralph killed them both by himself? Yes, Minister, Scrimgeour confirmed. There was also a Death Eater named Gibbon, also an accomplice, but he escaped. Fudge stared, his fat face a complex mix of shock and disbelief. Scrimgeour sighed inwardly. To be honest, his expression was even more varied than Fudge's when he first heard the news. How could a 13-year-old wizard survive 3 dark wizards? Not only did Curif survive and protect the 2 girls from harm, but he also single-handedly killed 2 of them, one of whom was a notorious werewolf. This feat was so horrifying that it sounded like a fantasy. But it was true, the bodies were right there, undeniable. Fudge took a deep breath, trying his best not to show his shock, but he still couldn't accept it. I remember the Ministry of Magic sent Aurors here to protect us, didn't I? Fudge suddenly asked. What did they say? Burke is dead, Scrimgeour sighed. He was cursed with a killing curse, and Grey Burke devoured most of his body. Fudge was even more speechless. The Ministry of Magic's Aurors were inferior to a mere teenager? Scrimgeour seemed to know what Fudge was thinking. He reminded him, Minister, Scamander stopped Quirrell from stealing the Philosopher's Stone and captured Peter. He's a genius, and he's friends with Nicholas Flamel. He can't be treated like a child, I know, Fudge sighed. Geniuses can't be measured by common sense, just like Dumbledore. His face turned grim, and he hurriedly asked, how is Ralph now? He fought a werewolf. Was he bitten? Scrimgeour pointed to the boy still undergoing dissection and teased, Minister, do you think he looks injured? Instead of worrying about whether Scamander is injured, Scrimgeour lowered his voice. We should consider whether to stop him and continue dissecting Greyback. Otherwise, he might end up leaving the ministry with only a wolf skin. Rolf's dissection plan was quickly stopped, which left him somewhat disappointed. The boy actually wanted to keep Greyback's body. As a werewolf, both his fur and flesh were valuable for research. However, Greyback was a criminal on the Ministry of Magic's radar, not a simple magical creature, so even if Ralph killed him, he couldn't keep him. After the autopsy, Ralph was questioned by Fudge, but didn't provide much valuable information. After all, he didn't recognize the mysterious wizard in the hood. Back in the house, Ralph took another shower to wash away the fishy smell before returning to his room in his pajamas. The hallway was quiet, it was late at night, and Sherry and Hermione should be asleep. But when he opened the door, he froze. Inside, the two girls sat facing each other, separated by a lamp. One was reading, the other was holding Crookshanks, glaring at him. Ralph glanced down the hallway to make sure he hadn't accidentally wandered into Sherry's or Hermione's room. This was his room. "Aren't you two asleep yet?" Ralph asked, puzzled. "How can I sleep after an attack tonight?" Hermione muttered. "It's all over now. Fudge left 5 Aurors to guard the neighborhood," Ralph said, entering the house. "Besides, I'm here." Neither girl spoke. Ralph raised an eyebrow. "Just say what you have to say. Why are you beating around the bush, Ralph? You weren't bitten by a werewolf, were you?" Hermione asked cautiously. "No," Ralph shook his head. "Did you check carefully?" Sherry asked cautiously. "What if there are any wounds?" "Yes, I just checked a book," Hermione said seriously. "According to the book, if someone is bitten by a shape-shifting werewolf, they will also be infected with werewolfism and eventually turn into a werewolf." "I know, then don't take it lightly." Hermione's face hardened, and she said seriously, "So many minor illnesses have become major problems because we don't pay attention to them. I told my neighbor to get vaccinated, but she wouldn't. One day she was bitten by a dog and died of rabies. I also had an elementary school classmate who had a persistent cold that wouldn't get better, and she didn't go to the hospital for a checkup. Then she died of a stroke. And, are you Conan? People around you always seem to die mysteriously." Seeing Hermione about to launch into a long explanation, Ralph quickly interrupted. "What do you two want?" "Just say it." The two girls exchanged a glance. Hermione, usually more outspoken and bold, hesitated to speak. Finally, the girl with the ponytail spoke up. "We want to check you out." You take off your clothes." "No need, is it?" Ralph couldn't help but fassip him. "I can check myself later." "Can you even check such a hard-to-reach area as your back?" Hermione asked. But there's no need for you two to bother," Ralph insisted. "What's there to be shy about? You told me before that veterinarians don't distinguish between genders," Sherry retorted softly. The girl said this, but her cheeks still flushed. "Thank you for putting your knowledge to use, Sherry," Ralph said. Backing away, "But really, it's not necessary." The two girls stood up and chased after the boy. "You two, don't come any closer." "Hey, just checked my back, I can handle the rest myself." "Hey, Crookshanks, where did you bite me?" Chapter 315 Maliciously Reprinted Edition. The news of Greyback's death made headlines in the Daily Prophet and spread rapidly throughout Britain. This werewolf, whose crimes were countless and formidable, never loved killing but instead bit, especially underage children, a true nightmare for wizards. His death was met with widespread satisfaction, especially by the families of wizards who had suffered at his hands. But a question arose: who killed Greyback? The Daily Prophet asserted that it was Rolf Scamander, but this claim was even more outrageous than Greyback's murder. Yes, Rolf had indeed recently captured the Death Eater Peter and exonerated Black, becoming a hero. But Peter was disguised as a rat at the time, making him relatively easy to capture. Greyback, however, was a truly vicious and ruthless werewolf, even more dangerous when transformed. If capturing Peter required intelligence, killing Greyback required strength. Did a 13-year-old boy possess that strength? The Ministry of Magic quickly confirmed the report, even providing a photo of Ralph stepping on the carcass of a giant wolf. With the ministry's endorsement, it caused a sensation, becoming a viral sensation following the photo taken at Nico's funeral the previous year, widely circulated throughout the wizarding world. No one paid attention to Peter anymore, as if he had never existed. All eyes were on Greyback. The ministry began publicizing the significance of Greyback's death, transforming him into the undisputed number 2 Death Eater. These same pronouncements had been used on Peter just a month earlier. While some newspapers did rummage through bound volumes, this malicious act undoubtedly drew a warning from the ministry. As the one who killed Greyback, Ralph once again enjoyed overwhelming publicity. He was the star of the summer. If, in capturing Peter, some wizards thought Ralph was too young and could only receive a Merlin second-class medal at best, now there was no objection. Everyone agreed he deserved a Merlin first-class medal. Of course, none of this concerned Ralph. After the attack, he became more cautious, staying home all day with Sherry and Hermione, engaging in academic research. It really was academic research. Hermione devised a comprehensive study plan and supervised Ralph and Sherry's studies. But this was summer vacation. Therefore, how to escape her clutches and secretly do what they loved became the main research topic for Ralph and Sherry for the rest of their time. Soon, summer vacation came to an end, and Hogwarts was finally about to start. On September 1st, in the early morning, Ralph stepped out of the house. Sherry stood at the door, carrying a black suitcase, waiting for the boy. Ralph no longer carried his own suitcase. Sherry did many things for him. Without a female assistant, tactical lean back, Hermione locked the door and walked alongside the two towards the entrance. 2 unmarked cars were parked on the side of the road, with several wizards in suits and shorts standing nearby. They were Aurors, there to provide security. These people had all witnessed Ralph dissecting the werewolf, and they couldn't help but wonder who'd protect him in a real emergency. After getting into the car, Ralph looked around. The interior was enlarged using a seamless expansion charm, and the surroundings were covered with protective magic. The driver chuckled, "Mr. Scamander, this curse-resistant car withstood a severe magical test. Mr. Fudge likes it very much and has been using it exclusively. Can it protect against Avada Kedavra?" Ralph asked curiously. I'm afraid not," Ralph suggested. "You can put a lot of rats in the car's compartments. That would create an anti-Avada Kedavra car." This was Ralph's first time riding in a curse-resistant car. He estimated its effectiveness was similar to an armored car. Unfortunately, no one attacked until they arrived at King's Cross, which disappointed the boy who wanted to see the effects. After getting off the car and saying goodbye to the Aurors, the 3 of them passed through the barriers and successfully entered Platform 9. A scarlet steam train was parked beside the platform, puffing out smoke. The platform was crowded with wizards seeing off their children. For safety, all 3 wore sun hats to cover their faces. But Ralph's signature black suitcase was quickly recognized by the students, immediately attracting a large crowd. On both sides of the train, many students leaned out of the windows, looking at Ralph with amazement and awe. Many others, unable to squeeze to the front, had to stand on their luggage and crane their necks to see. The most agile students climbed directly onto the top of the train to get a better look. There were also some newspaper reporters lying in wait, hoping to interview Ralph. They hadn't had a chance during the summer vacation and were now desperate. "What's going on?" Just then, a tall wizard pushed his way out of the crowd. He wore a black Hogwarts robe and a gleaming silver badge with the word HB on it. "What are you all doing here?" "Disperse immediately." Percy pushed through the crowd, shouting, "Hurry up! I'm the new student council president, Professor McGonagall's most reliable right-hand man, and I even have the authority to report directly to Headmaster Dumbledore." Percy emphasized his president status again, lightly wiping the badge on his chest as if it were Merlin's first-class order. Upon seeing Ralph, Percy immediately squeezed through the crowd, extending his hand solemnly as if meeting Ralph for the first time. "Ralph, it's a pleasure to see you here. I heard about you during the summer. I'm so happy for you, it's truly remarkable." Percy seemed afraid Ralph wouldn't see him, wiping the badge on his chest again. "Hello, Percy." Ralph suppressed a laugh, shook his hand, and said softly, "You've become the student council president?" "Yes, I'm the second in my family." Percy was very happy, but tried to appear nonchalant. Rove suddenly frowned. "Your badge, it's pretty, isn't it?" Percy said proudly. "I polish it with essential oils every day. It's very clean, but you want to touch it, don't you?" "No, I just wanted to remind you." Rove immediately stepped back. "Your badge is smoking." The boy quickly drew his wand and waved it lightly, summoning a radiant magical shield in front of him and the 2 girls. The magic on the badge vanished, turning back into a dung ball. Then, a roar followed, and the smell of rotten cheese and rotten eggs filled the platform. Moments later, Percy's roar came from within the smoke. Fred. George. I'm going to kill you all. Chapter 316 Shirley, Ralph, how come you're so skilled? Although there was no evidence, Percy insisted that the twins were responsible. After all, no one else would play such a prank, especially one targeting the newly elected student council president. As the stench spread, everyone was startled and retreated in panic, many stumbling and falling, quickly moving away from Percy. This finally cleared a path. Ralph quickly led Sherry and Hermione through the crowd to the train, where they found Neville in a carriage. "Neville, long time no see," Ralph greeted, sitting down and smiling. "How was your summer?" "Not so good," Neville sighed regretfully. "I spent a long part of the summer at St. Mungo's Hospital for Magic and Magic." "Are you injured?" Ralph asked with concern. "Did you fall while climbing Scoffer Peak?" At the end of summer vacation, Neville said he would go hiking on Scoffer Peak with his uncle, Neville Longbottom. Scoffer is the highest mountain in England and a mecca for mountaineering enthusiasts. "No," Neville shook his head, saying softly, "My uncle is injured." Ralph asked curiously, "Didn't you say your uncle was a skilled climber?" "He certainly is," Neville sighed softly, a wry smile on his face, still shaken. "My aunt found out the price of the outdoor gear my uncle bought, and sent him to the hospital. My uncle's outdoor tent cost 500 gallons, but he told my aunt he bought it for 50 gallons, Neville whispered, "and the hiking boots cost 80 gallons, he said they were free." "How did your aunt know?" Hermione couldn't help but ask. "Well," Neville blushed, scratching his head, "I accidentally let it slip, and I misremembered the price. I wrote the tent as 5,000 gallons." Ralph, Shirley, and Hermione were speechless. It wasn't Neville's uncle who should be hospitalized, but Neville himself. However, on the other hand, Uncle Neville often tricked him. Once, to get him to demonstrate his magic and prove he wasn't a squid, he threw him into a lake, where he nearly drowned. Neville has only survived this long thanks to a bit of luck. Now it's time for him to be filial to his uncle and let him make a fortune. After chatting for a while, Ralph took a cactus he'd brought back from Arizona from his box and gave it to Neville. Neville was very excited, he'd never grown such an American plant before. Besides Neville and Sherry, Ralph also brought Hermione a gift, a fan woven from Thunderbird tail feathers. When the fan was used, tiny flashes of lightning would appear. If Hermione got sleepy while studying late at night, she could use the fan to shock herself and clear her head. Ralph was so thoughtful. With a hoarse whistle, the Hogwarts Express finally started moving, quickly crossing the Thames and heading towards Scotland. The group chatted about summer vacation for a while, but their leisure time didn't last long before they were disturbed by groups of students. After the young wizards located Ralph, they kept bringing the pets to his door for treatment, and a long queue quickly formed. But there weren't that many sick pets, most were perfectly healthy, just looking for excuses to bother Ralph. Many girls, upon entering, immediately burst into giggles, hugging their companions, and then happily left. Others wanted to take the opportunity to inquire about the werewolf greyback. However, Ralph, as the veterinarian, maintained ample patience with each guest, showing no sign of impatience. "Your rabbit is just too hungry. That's why its stomach is growling. Take it back and feed it some food." Ralph handed a healthy rabbit back to a female student and said softly, "Okay, next one." The girl blushed as she took the rabbit, twisting the hem of her clothes in her hands. She bit her lip and finally mustered her courage to say, "Scamander, my name is Lotta Carl. I'm a freshman this year. I've seen the news about you. I'd really like to get to know you." Ralph looked up, his eyes clear, and smiled. "Lotta, is that you? I remember your name. We already know each other." Lotta looked into the boy's bright eyes, smiled shyly, and then paid him 50 gallons. Neville was full of admiration. Ralph chatted with pretty girls, whether they were strangers or acquaintances, and regardless of which house they belonged to, he was never shy, always poised and confident, giving off a warm feeling. He really wanted to learn a few tricks from Ralph so he could chat with Hannah with the same ease in the future. Hermione was utterly dumbfounded. A rabbit had simply not eaten, and they were charging so much for treating such a condition. What a fool. She even started thinking about opening a dental clinic at Hogwarts and making money like that. That way, she wouldn't have to ask her family for money to buy books. While Hermione was daydreaming, she silently labeled Lotta a fool in her mind. Lotta glanced at Hermione, labeled her a banyan-toothed girl in return, and then ignored her, focusing her attention on the girl with the ponytail. How could she be so beautiful? This made Lotta feel instantly discouraged. She had no chance of competing. Lotta's shifting gaze, especially her glance at the rabbit's teeth in her arms, infuriated Hermione. After Lotta left, it was soon time for her regular customer, Padma Pettier, but she wasn't there for pet treatment. She had important information to report. Rov, I caught a mouse. It might be Peter. Why don't you go check our carriage? Rov rolled his eyes. He wouldn't be coming back once he went. He'd been there before, and was immediately surrounded by a bunch of witches who locked the carriage doors. Stop messing around, Padma, Rov asked. If there's nothing else, next, I have something. I want to get an invisible tattoo, Padma said. You know, the kind that only appears after strenuous exercise. Oh, I know that, Rov nodded slightly. It's tattooed on the skin with cinnabar mixed with the blood of an invisible beast. It only shows after drinking alcohol or strenuous exercise. The boy immediately became interested. What kind of design do you want? I want a niffler tattooed on my chest, Padma said shyly. Rov, you, help me with it. Rov naturally refused. He was just a veterinarian. Even if his business expanded, it wouldn't extend to tattooing. However, based on the shape of the niffler and the blood of the invisible beast, Rov still gave Padma a lot of professional advice. After Padma left, Shirley, sitting next to Ralph, tilted her head slightly, gazing into the boy's eyes. The girl with the ponytail suddenly asked casually, Ralph, have you tattooed a lot of girls? Otherwise, how come you know so much about it? How are you so skilled? Ralph was on the verge of tears. He replied firmly, honestly, I know nothing about tattoos. Just then, a commotion erupted outside the door, and everyone rushed towards a certain carriage. Ralph peeked out and heard someone shout, a fight. Malfoy and Potter are fighting. Chapter 317 Malfoy gets rabies. The Malfoy family has a 1,000-year-old tradition. Every generation of wizards, at the age of 11, must choose a wizard of the same sex, forming a destiny-bound bond. They are not friends or enemies, but in truth, they deeply respect each other, being each other's most compatible soulmates. This rumor, no one knows who started it, but it suddenly began circulating widely at Hogwarts after the end of last term. And it was spread with great detail. The rumor went further, stating that the previous generation of Malfoys chose Arthur Weasley as their soulmate, and this generation's target is Harry Potter. This rumor sounds outrageous at first, but upon closer examination, it's chilling. After all, everyone recalls that in public places, Malfoy's provocative figure is always seen near Potter, even though the two aren't in the same house. For example, right now, on the Hogwarts Express, Malfoy is looking for Harry again. So, everyone suddenly realized, it seems the rumor is true, Malfoy really has chosen Potter as his soulmate. The rumor was, of course, spread by Ralph. He initially just said it casually, never expecting it to spark such a widespread discussion. Even Malfoy was inevitably affected, rushing to Potter on the first day of school to try and clarify the rumor. Of course, getting a beating for Potter while he was at it would be great. The main reason Malfoy was so eager to cause trouble for Harry was that Harry was famous, and their fighting strength was evenly matched, not one-sided. If the difference in strength was too great, like with someone like Ralph, Malfoy would stay far away, since he wanted to enjoy the feeling of conquest, not one-sided beatings. But today, he was destined not to enjoy that. Malfoy and his two henchmen had only rushed into the carriage a short while before retreating in terror. A large black dog emerged from the carriage, letting out a low growl, not quite a howl, but a threatening growl. But the dog's massive size was enough to terrify Malfoy. He leaned against the other wall, trembling, his face filled with fear, even his voice trembling as he spoke. You, don't come any closer. Malfoy turned and ran, but the black dog leaped up and tumbled him to the ground. Get it away, Malfoy screamed, his body twisting and rolling wildly. Get it away. Help. The students stood there dumbfounded, only belatedly snapping out of their daze after hearing Malfoy's cries, and then they ran off. But not to rescue him, instead, they turned and scattered. What was that? Neville asked in horror. Why is there such a big dog on the train? Ralph frowned. It must be Sirius Black. His animagus form is a black dog. How did Black get on the train? Hermione asked in surprise. He probably came with Harry. Ralph thought for a moment and said, Peter ran away, and Sirius must really want to catch him. At this moment, the black dog had already bitten Malfoy's arm and dragged him effortlessly into the toilet, as if dragging a rag doll. Howls of agony echoed from inside the toilet. Rolf seemed thoughtful. He suddenly turned around, put his arm around the ponytail girl's shoulder, and chuckled, "Shirley, the money giver will be here soon. It's time to test your acting skills, don't give yourself away." Shirley instantly understood what the boy meant. Her eyes sparkled, and she softly replied, "I know, but does this count as overtime?" "Yes," Rolf laughed. "Shall we split it 90-10? Are you trying to fool a niffler?" Shirley mimicked Rolf's zen-like mannerisms, playfully adding, "At least it should be 30/70. Rolf shook his head dismissively, suppressing a laugh, and said, "It's too expensive. I'll ask Hermione and Neville for help." Hermione quickly shook her head, righteously declaring, "I won't do anything to cheat people." Neville was more than willing to help, but his acting, even a dog would shake its head in disbelief. "It's a 40-60 split." Shirley smiled brightly, her eyes narrowed, and said seriously, "If you hesitate any longer, it'll be 50-50. All right, 30-70 it is." Rolf reached out and gently tapped the ponytail girl's forehead, his touch gentle, and smiled. "You're as greedy as Niffler. You're lucky to have such a good boss like me. Who even pays you overtime?" Shirley smiled sweetly at the boy. "I'm thinking of hiring you as my assistant in the future. I need to save some money. That fixed salary won't do." Rolf smiled knowingly. "I'm waiting for you to be my boss's wife in the future." "Okay, boss." The ponytail girl blinked obediently. Less than 20 minutes later, there was indeed a loud knocking on the door outside the carriage. When Neville opened the door, he saw Goyle and Crabbe carrying a stretcher with Malfoy lying on it. Malfoy was crying incessantly, making a sound that was almost like a sob. "I've been bitten by a dog. Please treat my wound." "Scamander." Malfoy looked disheveled, but after a careful examination, Rolf found the wounds weren't deep or in any vital areas. It seemed Sirius had been very careful with his bite. However, Rolf's face hardened, and he said helplessly, "Malfoy, your wound isn't too difficult to treat." But what?" Malfoy asked nervously. "You were bitten by a dog, and I saw the dog. It's a rabid dog. It's sick." Rolf sighed. "Its saliva contains the rabies virus, which will enter your nerve cells through your wound and then travel to your brain. In a few days, or at most years, you'll develop a fever, a sore throat, and hydrophobia. Eventually, you'll become paralyzed, eventually leading to respiratory muscle paralysis, and death by suffocation." Malfoy's face turned deathly pale. He couldn't control his fear. It felt as if a chill was seeping from his very bones. "Please," he cried out, "save me. Rabies is a terminal illness." "Even I," Rolf said regretfully, "I'm afraid I can't do anything." "Rolf, didn't you just get a new vial of medicine?" Sherry suddenly whispered. "You said it was very effective in treating rabies." "Shut up, don't talk nonsense," Rolf scolded. "That's all the medicine I have. It was given to me by my grandfather to save my life." Sherry looked aggrieved and muttered, "What time is it now?" "Saving lives is the priority." "That's right, Rolf, sell it to me quickly. We're distant relatives. My great-uncle's aunt and your grandfather's mother are sisters." Malfoy tugged at the boy's sleeve and pleaded, "Just sell it to me." "But this medicine is very expensive." "Malfoy," Rolf sighed, "it's not that I don't want to sell it to you, it's that you can't afford it. I have money. I brought 1,000 galleons with me this time." Malfoy took out his wallet made of shape-shifting lizard skin and emptied everything out. 1,000 isn't enough. This will do as a discount." Malfoy picked up a lifeless glass eyeball and said anxiously, "I bought this at Borgenbach for 800 galleons, then I'll take a small loss. After all, we're classmates." Rolf sighed. "Sherry, bring the medicine." Sherry moved lightly and took a bottle of medicine from the box. When the girl handed it to the boy, they looked at each other and saw the smile in each other's eyes, so they struggled to suppress their laughter. After taking the medicine, Malfoy hesitated and whispered, "This time it's not urine, is it?" Malfoy remembered the first time they met, when he was taken by Matra Rat and tricked by the boy into drinking armadillo urine. "It's not urine. This only needs to be applied externally to the wound," Rolf instructed, "but there's something I must remind you. The poison needs to be sucked out by Goyle and Crabbe with their mouths first, and then the medicine can be applied." Malfoy's face turned red. He wanted to curse but dared not, feeling extremely frustrated. He had several wounds on his buttocks. Damn Potter. When he got back to Hogwarts, he was going to make sure Professor Snape beat that black dog to death. Soon, Malfoy was carried away by Goyle and Crabbe. Hermione tilted her head, looked at Ralph, propped her chin on 2 fingers, and clicked her tongue. "You're so mean, always managing to trick someone." Neville glanced at Hermione. He really wanted to say, "You never mention how many times you've been tricked, you lose every bet with Ralph, you're practically bankrupt yourself." Of course, Neville only thought it, not daring to say it aloud. "Lucius Malfoy is a Death Eater, so it's fine if I cheated him," Ralph chuckled. "It's better for me to swindle this money than for Voldemort to resurrect and use it to fund his expansion. Besides," Ralph pinched the glass eye between his thumb and forefinger, and smiled, "Malfoy should thank us." A moment later, someone knocked on the door. Neville opened it again, and Draco was still lying on the stretcher, crying. "I forgot to say, thank you." Ralph winked at everyone. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 318: The New Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor. Not long after Malfoy left, there was another knock at the door. Ralph opened it to find a middle-aged man standing there. "Ralph, hello," the man said with a broad smile, putting his arm around the boy's shoulder. "Long time no see." Ralph looked at the man carefully, then recognized him as Sirius Black. 2 months ago, Sirius had only recently escaped Azkaban, his face thin and haggard, covered in long, unkempt black hair. After a summer of recuperation, his hair was now short, clean, and neat, and his cheeks were fuller. Although his face was still weathered, he looked much younger. "Hello, Sirius, please come in," Ralph said with a smile. Sirius entered the carriage, looking at Ralph with concern in his eyes. "I heard Greyback attacked you. You weren't bitten by that beast, were you?" "No," Ralph shook his head calmly. "It was just a werewolf, it couldn't hurt me." Sirius released Ralph's arm, relieved. "That's good. I was so worried. I tried to see you several times, but the Ministry refused. They didn't want to reveal your location." Ralph raised an eyebrow. "Minister Fudge didn't tell me." "Fudge probably didn't want me to leak the information. Peter's escape is already giving him enough trouble." Ralph nodded slightly and turned to introduce himself. "Sirius, let me introduce you. This is Shirley Swinton. This is Hermione Granger, and Neville Longbottom, both my friends." "Hello everyone." Sirius nodded to the crowd, his smiling gray eyes looking at Sherry and Hermione. "I heard from Ralph that you two ladies were also present when Peter was captured." "Thank you so much for your bravery." Sherry and Hermione both laughed and greeted each other. Sirius looked at the timid Neville, stared at him for a moment, and sighed softly. "Neville, hello. You look just like your father, though he's much thinner than you." "Really?" Neville was excited, clenching his fists with longing and anticipation. "Mr. Black, are you close to my father?" "Not just your father, but your mother too. I know them both well. We were classmates, both in Gryffindor, and after graduation, we joined the Order of the Phoenix together." Sirius reminisced. "Your father was kind and gentle, with exceptional talent. Your mother spoke softly, loved to laugh, and had an impeccable temper. James and I used to play pranks, and many people were annoyed by us. But your parents, instead of getting angry, would even smile." Sirius suddenly laughed. "Speaking of which, when Alice married your father, many of her peers were quite upset." Neville hummed in agreement, turned his head slightly, and wiped his face haphazardly. "My grandmother rarely talked about my parents' school days, only saying they were good people, heroes." "They were heroes, of course." Sirius put his arm around Neville's shoulder, looking at the boy with a sorrowful, bittersweet gaze. "Neville, if you ever want to know more about your parents, you can come to me." Neville nodded vigorously. Sirius sat down in a chair and asked, "Draco Malfoy was just here?" "Yes." Ralph recounted the transaction. "Well done, that kid deserved to suffer." Sirius made no attempt to hide his dislike for his nephew. "He's just like his father, so annoying, typical Slytherin." "Let's not talk about that." Sirius looked at Ralph and said, "I went to Albania this summer, to look for Peter Pettigrew." Ralph asked softly. "Yes, Dumbledore said that I would go there to find his master." Sirius lowered his voice. "Voldemort." Neville's face paled with terror at the name. "Are you going alone?" Ralph asked curiously. "I asked Fudge to allocate some Aurors for me." Sirius shook his head. "He readily agreed, but every time he told me we were short-handed and to wait." "How could Minister Fudge do that?" Hermione exclaimed angrily. "Back when Fudge was the Deputy Minister of the Department of Magical Disasters, he was notorious for his procrastination, hesitation, and perfunctory work. Now that he's become minister, he's still the same, Sirius sneered. When it comes to an action, our valiant minister is second to none. So, in the end, only Remus and I went to Albania. Sirius shrugged. Ralph and Sherry exchanged glances. They were both familiar with Lupin. They had learned a lot of magic from him last summer. Lupin left Romania, Ralph asked. Yes, after he saw the news about me and Peter, he immediately resigned from the Romanian Dragon Sanctuary and went home. Sirius looked at the boy, his expression serious. Ralph, Remus asked me to apologize to you on his behalf. You found him a job, but he suddenly quit. What's the big deal? Ralph smiled, unconcerned. Did you find anything in Albania? We encountered Peter at a hotel. Sirius's face darkened, his fists clenched. We almost caught him, but he was rescued by a mysterious wizard. Ralph thought for a moment and asked, was he short, but wearing a blouse so we couldn't see his face? You've seen him? Sirius asked excitedly. Yes, Ralph nodded, his expression grave. He appeared the night Gibbon and Greyback attacked. That man claimed he rescued Peter and that he put a bounty on my head. Sirius frowned. Do you have any leads? Ralph asked. Back in school, who was Peter close to? Sirius thought carefully for a moment, then said decisively, back in school, besides a few of us, Peter had no other friends. He was like a shadow, always following us around. He pondered for a moment, then said, puzzled, I don't really believe the Death Eaters saved him. Why do you say that? Those Death Eaters hated Peter no less than I did. Sirius explained. Voldemort, based on Peter's information, went to James's house but ultimately failed. The Death Eaters all thought Peter was a fraud and wanted to confront him. When I was in Azkaban, I heard many Death Eaters wanting to kill him to avenge Voldemort. It wasn't Peter's friend, nor were they Death Eaters who saved Peter, so who could the mysterious wizard be? Ralph instinctively rubbed his temples with a finger, muttering to himself, if only we could catch Gibbon. He accepted the bounty. He must be connected to that mysterious wizard. We could send Remus, Sirius suggested. He knows Nocturne Alley well, he's lived there for many years. Lupin, the boy hesitated. Isn't he teaching defense against the dark arts this year? He doesn't have time to find Gibbon. Who told you Remus is the professor of dark arts? Sirius raised his thin black eyebrows, proudly announcing, I'm your new dark arts teacher this year. Professor Black. Chapter 319 Dementors. As the saying goes, the end of the universe is the establishment. This theorem applies equally to the magical world. The professions of Ministry of Magic staff and Hogwarts teachers are equally coveted and loved by wizards, even the Dark Lord is no exception. Young Voldemort dreamed of securing a teaching position at Hogwarts and becoming a defense against the dark arts professor. Unfortunately, fate intervened. He failed the interview twice, rejected by both headmasters. Enraged, the young Dark Lord vowed that any defense against the dark arts professor at Hogwarts would suffer misfortune and be unable to serve for more than a year. Although Voldemort never officially responded to this rumor in public, over the decades, the position of defense against the dark arts has seen a recurring turnover of teachers, more frequent than the coaching changes in the Chinese national football team. Defense against the dark arts has proven with its glorious record that this position is indeed not just any ordinary evil. Therefore, not becoming a defense against the dark arts professor at Hogwarts is a causal law of this world, one that cannot and must not be transgressed. So, when Ralph heard that Sirius had become a new professor, he had only one thought, how many lives does he have to squander like this? He just came out of the advanced studies program in Azkaban, and he's already thinking of sending me away, huh? But Sirius was stubborn and refused to believe it. He explained, I know this position might be cursed, but not all professors die. Many left Hogwarts alive. Indeed, some teachers did leave alive, like Lockhart from the original timeline. He didn't die, but his memories were completely erased, and he ended up in the permanent quarters of St. Mungo's Hospital for Magic and Wizardry. And Umbridge first suffered humiliation at the hands of centaurs, and then, after the war, ended up in Azkaban. None of them had a good ending. Don't try to persuade me. I know what I'm doing. If there really is a Voldemort curse, I want to see it for myself. Sirius laughed heartily, displaying the boldness and recklessness that had existed in his youth. Besides, this position needs a wizard to teach it, and Dumbledore can't find a suitable candidate. It's either me or Remus. Rather than putting him in danger, I'd rather give it a try. Compared to his friend Lupin, Sirius felt his life was worthless and not worth wasting. Otherwise, he wouldn't have stayed in Azkaban for over a decade. Also, I heard Harry say that Snape is also teaching at Hogwarts and has applied multiple times to be the defense against the dark arts professor. Sirius's lips curled into a mischievous grin. Snape's dream course has been snatched away by me. It'll be hilarious when he finds out. Sirius grinned triumphantly. Ralph sighed softly. He'd rather face the curse himself than let Snape get what he wanted. Good brothers like Sirius and Snape are probably gone forever. Wait, won't they fight when they meet? Hermione crossed her arms, her brow furrowed as she asked sharply, Sirius, do you hate Professor Snape? Not so much hate, but mortal enemy, Sirius replied with disgust. We've disliked each other since the first day on the train. Snape was a slick, shiny-haired, smooth-talking little boy who knew more spells than half the 7th-year students when he first arrived. Snape was also fascinated by the dark arts. He was recruited by a Slytherin group. And those people, later, almost all of them became Death Eaters. You mean Professor Snape was a Death Eater? Neville asked, his face filled with horror. Neville, Professor Snape is not a Death Eater, Ralph said softly. Remember, he may not be a good person, but he's definitely one of us, someone we can trust. Sirius looked at Ralph, wondering why the boy trusted Snape so much, just as he didn't understand why Dumbledore trusted him. Ralph blinked his bright, blue crystal-like eyes and said softly, Sirius, I know hatred and prejudice can never be completely eradicated, but don't judge a person easily based on preconceived notions. I understand. Sirius calmed down, put his arm around the boy's shoulder, and smiled. Ralph, I'm willing to believe you. After all, you saved me. Anyway, I won't easily clash with Snape. Just then, a loud clattering sound came from the corridor. A smiling woman with dimples knocked on the stall door and asked, Darling, would you like to buy some food? Mrs. Sutherland, do you remember me? Sirius waved. Sirius? I saw in the newspaper that you were released from prison. Mrs. Sutherland smiled. Yes, madam, you haven't changed a bit. Sirius picked up a chocolate frog, swallowed it, and chuckled. It still tastes the same. I've missed it for 11 years. I used to hate this stuff, but back in Azkaban, I don't know why, I suddenly started craving it. Eat as much as you like, Madam Sutherland said with a kind smile. You don't need to pay this time, it's on me. Thank you, madam, Sirius replied with a smile. After the witch selling snacks left, Sirius stayed in the carriage for a while before getting up to leave. He wanted to check the train for any trace of Peter before going to find his godson, Harry. Ralph and the others ate snacks and played wizarding chess. Crookshanks jumped around in the carriage, seemingly very interested in Neville's toad, Raffer. After Raffer's ADHD was cured, he liked to sleep on Neville's head, completely ignoring Crookshanks. Unbeknownst to them, a torrential downpour began, turning the window panes a thick, sticky gray that gradually deepened. The sky grew increasingly dark, and the lights in the corridor and on the luggage racks came on. Just then, the train began to slow, the wheels quieting down, while the wind and rain outside intensified. Neville, gazing out the dark window, asked, Have we arrived yet? No, at least another hour's journey. Hermione glanced at her watch, puzzled. Why has the train stopped? It's the Dementors, Ralph explained, standing up. They're here to check if Peter is here. Dementors are boarding the train, Neville gasped, visibly terrified. In the magical world, wizards, besides the Dark Lord, feared Azkaban and Dementors most. The train suddenly jolted and stopped, all the lights going out instantly, plunging the carriage into complete darkness. Ralph snapped his fingers, and flames erupted around the carriage, illuminating it. He opened the carriage door, and several Dementors appeared in the distance down the aisle. They wore black hooded cloaks, their bodies were gray, and they looked like rotting corpses. As they inhaled, a gurgling sound came from their throats. Ralph stared at the group of Dementors, and suddenly a ding sounded in his mind. Wild Dementors detected, triggering side quest 1, capture a Dementor, reward, memory siphon. By breathing, you can absorb happy and joyful memories from animals, causing them to feel depressed and desperate. Side quest 2, tame a Dementor 100%, reward, kiss of death. By kissing, you can absorb the souls of animals. Chapter 320 The Master's Mission. The Dementors began checking each carriage, and one of them quickly reached the room where Ralph was. Entering the carriage, it sensed the group's joy and couldn't help but take a deep, slow, forceful breath, like a cat encountering catnip. Ah, so refreshing. The temperature inside the carriage plummeted, a thick chill enveloping the group, seemingly penetrating to the bone, every muscle tensing. After its scan, the Dementor didn't leave the carriage but remained, inhaling deeply, its throat emitting satisfied gurgling sounds. Ralph gently blew on the flame beside him, causing it to leap high, but the flickering heat didn't dispel the cold. He said, "The person you're looking for isn't here. Leave now." The Dementor didn't leave. Instead, as if sensing something, it suddenly fixed its gaze on Ralph's black leather suitcase. A gray, scabbed hand emerged from the cloak, the decaying hand emitting a faint glow, reaching towards the black suitcase. Ralph sat calmly in his chair, warning, "I advise you not to touch my box, it's dangerous." The Dementor ignored the boy, instead reaching out to open the box. It saw a passage and poked its head inside. Then, the Dementor was suddenly struck as if by a hammer, its entire body flying backward, crashing into the door and bursting through it, landing in the aisle, terrifying the young wizard in the opposite carriage. It dared to hide a Dementor. Was it courting death? Ralph got up and walked out of the room. He looked at the Dementor, tilted his head, and brushed the dust off his shoulder with 2 fingers, saying, "I told you not to touch my box, why didn't you listen? Did you hurt yourself?" The Dementor floated up, enraged by the attack, and lunged at Ralph, but was knocked away again, landing in the train aisle and sliding back more than a meter. Ralph's lips curled into a chuckle. A girl with a ponytail stood beside the boy. Beside Shirley stood a white magical creature. Its silvery white fur was dazzling, radiating a holy light that seemed to dispel the chill in the air. Hearing the commotion, the young wizards peeked out from their carriages, many quickly recognizing the creature, a unicorn. Yes, it was indeed a unicorn. 2 years ago, Voldemort possessed Quirrell's head, killing many unicorns in the Forbidden Forest and drinking their blood to prolong his life. This unicorn was the one Ralph had rescued in the Forbidden Forest, for which he received the system reward of the spell Healing Hand. Its effect was to heal wounds simply by touching them. Unicorns were the purest life forms in the magical world. Killing them would inflict a curse, leaving one half dead. And these holy creatures, like patronuts, could drive away dark creatures like Dementors and Voldemorts. One could only say that for a magical creature to dare casually touch a magizoologist's box, that was certainly audacious. "You're the one, unicorn," Ralph commanded. "Use rocket headbutt." However, the unicorn ignored Ralph's command, instead tilting its head and glancing at Sherry beside it. Unicorns were strange creatures. They were unusually shy and afraid of humans, but this human only referred to males. Upon encountering a pure young girl, the unicorn would no longer be afraid, but instead feel close, willing to be touched and ridden by her. This instinct wasn't necessarily good, but it wasn't necessarily bad either. After all, Ralph also had this instinct, and he couldn't blame himself. However, this unicorn was indeed heartless. Ralph had saved its life, but after Sherry fed it a few times, it ignored Ralph and only obeyed Sherry. Ralph wasn't embarrassed that he couldn't command the unicorn. After all, its obedience to Sherry was equivalent to its obedience to Ralph's. This was his master's, his boss's mission. Ralph merely glanced at her, and the girl with the ponytail understood instantly. She mimicked her, shouting, "Ariete, use rocket headbutt." The unicorn pawed the ground with one hoof, letting out a loud neigh, and then its 4 limbs shot up like an arrow, hurtling towards the Dementor. The unicorn and Dementor collided head-on, the golden horn on its head piercing deeply into the Dementor's writhing body. The Dementor groaned in excruciating pain, curling up in agony. The unicorn pulled out its horn and stomped hard on the Dementor's body with its 4 legs. With a deafening crash, the sinister, tall body flew through the air, spun, and then plummeted like a withered leaf in the wind. The other Dementors, startled, also floated over, attempting to surround Ralph and Sherry. The unicorn reared up on its 4 legs and galloped down the corridor, striking the Dementors in the shoulder socket with lightning speed. The powerful impact forced them backward. It just goes to show, a natural enemy is a natural enemy, a complete counter. "Get off the train. This isn't a place for you," Ralph shouted. He really wanted to capture a Dementor for research. But Dementors were, after all, official guards of Azkaban, and surrounded by students. How could he possibly catch them in broad daylight? He'd deal with them when they were alone. The students emerged from the carriage, their faces filled with shock as they watched the scene unfold, then began to murmur amongst themselves. Even Malfoy squeezed through the crowd, wanting to see the battle. However, Malfoy's attention was quickly drawn to Harry in the crowd. He was far more attractive than the unicorn. Malfoy looked around but didn't see the big black dog near Harry. A perfect opportunity for revenge. Malfoy pushed his way towards Harry. The Dementors were unwilling to give up. They sensed the joyful atmosphere and longed for a feast, but the unicorn lightly stomped its hoof, forcing them to drift towards the carriage door. Harry watched the Dementors drift past him, suddenly feeling a chill run through his body, up his arms, and into his heart. For a few seconds, the icy sensation invigorated Harry, but then everything began to tremble, and his fingers could no longer stay still. Then, Harry's eyes rolled upwards, and he fell backward, landing in the arms of the person behind him. Malfoy was standing behind Harry. He had just raised his wand when he saw Harry fall into his arms. Everyone looked at the two of them. Malfoy was completely bewildered. Holding his wand in one hand and Harry in the other, he cried out, "It wasn't me. It wasn't me. It wasn't me. You all saw it." Potter fell down on his own. "I didn't touch him." Chapter 321 Reunion after 12 years. The Hogwarts Express slowly pulled into the station, and students filed out, arriving at Hogsmeade Station. Standing on the dilapidated platform, the young wizards shivered, instinctively wanting to retreat back to the warmer train. It was just too cold, a continuous downpour was falling, and the platform was frozen solid, chilling the students to the bone. Hogsmeade truly lived up to its name as a rundown station. Aside from a signpost, there was nowhere to shelter from the wind and rain. Calling it a ruins would be an understatement. Ralph looked up at the gray sky. The rain showed no signs of letting up. He raised his arm, and the torrential rain above his head abruptly stopped. Although the rain had stopped, it was still very cold. Sherry pulled her thick cloak tighter, her hands tucked into her sleeves, and stiffly and clumsily waved her wand, tapping her and Ralph's heads. White smoke immediately rose from the boy's hair, and his body warmed up. Shirley stretched like a cat, but accidentally stepped on the ice and slipped. Luckily, Ralph caught her in time to prevent her from falling. Shirley steadied herself, thanked him, and carefully raised her wand, aiming it at Hermione. White smoke rose from Hermione's body as she looked up at the sky. The rain continued to pour down all around, but above their heads, the raindrops bounced back instead of falling. Hermione could conjure an umbrella and keep her clothes dry, but she couldn't bounce raindrops back as easily as Ralph. She had seen the boy use this magic several times, and even now, it still seemed amazing. "Why do you know so many strange spells?" Hermione couldn't help but ask. "It's a secret," Ralph smiled mysteriously, extending two fingers and pretending to pinch the raindrops in the sky, summoning a large amount of rain out of thin air. The raindrops condensed into sparkling droplets, dancing on the boy's fingertips, as if freshly picked from lotus leaves after the rain. Hermione stared at the droplets, saying fiercely, "I'll find out sooner or later." "Why don't you two make a bet?" Neville whispered, egging him on. Ralph was about to nod when Hermione quickly waved her hand, saying, "Betting is bad." "I've given it up," Ralph sighed softly. The droplets shattered in his palm, turning into a puddle of rainwater, which then condensed into an ice flower a moment later. However, the ice flower was exceptionally ugly, its appearance truly unbearable to look at. Ralph couldn't bear to look at it and casually tossed it on the ground, only to have Sherry bend down and pick it up. Ralph asked curiously, "Why did you pick up such an ugly ice flower?" The girl with the ponytail wiped the dust off the ice flower, smiled brightly, and said softly, "It's very pretty. If you don't want it, I'll take it." Ralph chuckled, "Are you being sarcastic?" The girl with the ponytail smiled and didn't argue. She carefully put the ice flower in her pocket, thinking that she would ask Professor McGonagall later, what kind of magic could keep it from melting and preserve it forever. "First-year students, come here," a familiar voice suddenly rang out. Hagrid's burly figure appeared on the path, a polished oil lamp in his left hand, a muscular pink umbrella in his right, and a delicate but timid big dog toothpick at his feet. The new students all walked towards Hagrid. They needed to brave the heavy rain and go on a traditional lake crossing trip. But traveling by boat in this weather was simply torture. The students above the second year walked along a muddy road towards the Thestrals. "Good evening, Ralph," Ginny said, pulling Luna closer and waving. The little girl quickly noticed something amiss. She folded her umbrella, stuck the tip into the mud beside her as a walking stick, and asked in surprise, "It's not raining over your heads?" Many of the young wizards, hearing Ginny's words, looked up, noticing this magical scene, and then began to murmur amongst themselves. "Just a little magic trick." Ralph smiled and asked, "Did you enjoy your time in Egypt?" During the summer holidays, Mr. Weasley received the Daily Prophet's annual galleon prize, winning 700 galleons. His whole family went on a trip to Egypt, and also to visit their eldest son, Bill, who was grave robbing there. And then, the Weasley family, who only had 1 galleon in their coffers, spent all 700 galleons in one summer. To be honest, it would be strange if the Weasley family weren't poor. "Egypt is amazing, full of ancient sorcerer ruins," Ginny said excitedly. "Bill took us to all the pyramids, and I brought you gifts." Ginny pulled several scarab beetle mummies from her pocket and handed them to Rove and Luna. These things were supposed to ward off evil spirits when hung above the bed. "Hanging dung beetle corpses to ward off evil spirits, huh?" Rove wanted to retort. "I brought you gifts too." The boy flipped his wrist, pulling out 2 obsidian amulets and handing them to Ginny and Luna. Luna looked a little listless. She took the amulets, held them to her ear, and tapped them lightly, listening to the crisp sound. Then, staring at the boy with her gray eyes, she said, "Rove, thank you for the amulets. I suddenly feel much better." Rove glanced at the girl's pale face, frowned, and asked, "Luna, you don't look well." Luna was affected by the Dementors, Ginny explained. "People with painful memories are more affected," Ralph said, pulling out a large piece of chocolate and handing it over. "Eat some of this, it'll make you feel much better." Harry fainted, and I saw Professor Black give him some chocolate too. "Does this stuff really work?" Ginny asked curiously. "I mean, is this not ordinary chocolate, or is there some kind of potion in it?" "No, nothing's added. It's just ordinary chocolate," Ralph explained with a smile. "Chocolate itself is a special remedy for mitigating the negative effects of Dementors. Consuming chocolate can improve a bad mood, and because of this characteristic, for those who have been affected by Dementors, chocolate is the best antidote. Of course, chocolate is only a short-term remedy." The group quickly reached a carriage, climbed in, and the Thestrals started moving, pulling the carriage along the muddy road, heading east towards Hogwarts Castle. Passing the school gates, they could still see 2 tall, hooded Dementors standing there. They stretched their necks and inhaled deeply, like old smokers inhaling second-hand smoke. The carriage pulled up to the castle, and everyone disembarked, including Sirius Black. He jumped down, stood at the castle gate, hands clasped behind his back, and gazed upwards, unwilling to look away for a long time. Sirius, who had always worn a smile, now seemed like a wanderer who had been away from home for many years, suddenly returning, a look of weariness and dazedness inexplicably appearing on his face. Sirius had once thought he would never see Hogwarts again, just as he would never see James and Lily again. The oak door creaked open, and a middle-aged man stepped out. He wore a black robe, had empty black eyes, greasy black hair, and a large, hooked nose. The 2 middle-aged men looked at each other, their gazes like magnets, drawn together, unable to look away. In that moment, it felt like an eternity had passed in a single glance. Chapter 322. Come on, let's hurt each other. A hooked nose, black hair, and a gait like a bat. Even after 12 years apart, Sirius recognized Snape at a glance based solely on these features. "Oh, Severus, it's good to see you. My dear old classmate." Snape ignored Black's pleasantries, looking at him with an almost dismissive smile. "You're still alive, Black, that surprises me. I thought you'd be a pile of bones in Azkaban long ago." "You'll be disappointed, Severus," Sirius laughed. "Too bad I'm tough enough not to die from the Dementor's kiss. You Gryffindor lions are indeed tough, like your friend Peter Pettigrew, who should have died 12 years ago, but is still alive." Snape's large mouth beneath his hooked nose twisted into a mocking smile. He said sarcastically, "I heard you served 12 years in prison for him. Wow, what a brotherly scene, truly a close friend, so heartwarming. I admit I misjudged him back then, trusted the wrong person," Sirius said, his smile fading, his voice deep and cold. "I will kill Peter, I swear I will kill him, to avenge James and Lily." "I doubt it," Snape drawled. "You were completely fooled by him back then. Do you really think things will change now, or does Azkaban come with the ability to increase intelligence? If so, I might believe that a stupid but arrogant idiot like you could do it. You've been clever since you were a child." Sirius Black pursed his lips, barely containing his anger. "You joined a bunch of evil Slytherin bastards in school, and after graduation, you followed them to Voldemort. When Voldemort fell, you switched sides again. You're certainly not stupid, Severus. You know what's best for you, always on the side of the stronger. Your intelligence truly impresses me. Your friends back then were far inferior to you. Most of them died on the battlefield, and a small portion ended up in Azkaban, unlike you, who are happily enjoying yourself at Hogwarts. Sirius Black was less than 2 palms width away from Snape's face. They could feel each other's breath. I don't understand why Dumbledore and Ralph both believed you, thought you were reformed, but I know you. Responsibility, honor, friendship, which of these do you possess? Sirius asked softly, his gaze lingering on Snape's face. HMPH, don't bother thinking about it. We both know the answer. Severus, you're a smart man, but also a coward, a wimp. Snape's eyes widened suddenly, filled with hatred and utter contempt. Yes, I'm a wimp, not as good as you, great warrior. But, Black, Snape retorted venomously, at least I wasn't stupid enough to change the secret keeper at the last minute, causing the death of my best friend. Sirius felt his blood rush to his face. For a moment, Ralph thought the two were about to draw their wands and fight. After all, they were both so adept at hurting each other, constantly teetering on the edge of their respective sensitivities. As expected of the best friend, they always know what to say to break down each other's defenses. But just then, Professor McGonagall appeared. She walked over, pursed her lips, and asked sternly, "What's going on? What are you two doing here?" "Nothing, Professor McGonagall." Sirius Black took a step back, panting as if he had just finished a long run. "Just 2 old classmates catching up, talking about the Dark Lord and his henchmen and such." "Speaking of dogs," Snape sneered, "I recently received a letter from Mr. Malfoy claiming that Potter brought a large black dog onto the train and even let it bite him. Is that right, Mr. Malfoy?" "Yes, Sir." Malfoy, standing in the crowd, blushed slightly and exclaimed excitedly, "Mr. Scamander can testify that he even gave me medicine for rabies." Ralph, who was about to slip through the door with Sherry, Hermione, and Neville, had to stop. He replied, "Oh, yes, that's right. I did treat Malfoy's wound, but as for who bit him, I'm not quite sure. It's all right, there will definitely be other witnesses." Snape smiled slyly, a hint of smugness in his eyes. "I remember Mr. Potter still has a disciplinary warning. If this is proven, Professor Dumbledore probably won't have any reason to keep you on." "Professor Snape, I must remind you, that dog was me in disguise," Sirius Black said expressionlessly. "Malfoy and his 2 lackeys committed acts of bullying against Harry. As a teacher, I was just giving him a small punishment." "This has nothing to do with Harry." "Punishment?" Professor McGonagall exclaimed. "Professor Black, we never use magic to punish students, let alone bite students as punishment." "I know. Deductions, detention." Sirius Black shrugged. "Professor McGonagall, this is my first time as a professor. I'll become more familiar with these rules and be more measured when disciplining students. I will also learn from Professor Snape and adopt his excellent methods for disciplining Gryffindor students." Malfoy hadn't expected to be bitten by the new professor. He looked up at Black, muttering something, a few words clearly audible. "My father, you can go back and tell your father, but you'd better tell your mother." "Narcissa Black Malfoy?" Sirius Black smiled faintly. "Tell her that my cousin missed her and her husband while she was in Azkaban. It's a real shame that Bella and I were both in prison and didn't get to see her." Malfoy's slightly flushed face turned pale again. Snape snorted, too lazy to pay attention to the foul-mouthed mad dog, turned and strode away. "All students, go inside," Professor McGonagall urged. "Hurry, the first years will be here soon." The students reluctantly headed towards the Great Hall. Sirius walked up to Professor McGonagall, his voice full of apology. "I'm sorry, Professor McGonagall, I've caused you trouble on my first day." Professor McGonagall was taken aback. The Sirius she remembered had never apologized like this. He was always so carefree and unrestrained, like a combination of the Weasley twins. But then it dawned on her, they hadn't seen each other for 12 years. For Sirius, those were cruel 12 years. Time had left its mark on him and changed his personality. McGonagall looked up and carefully examined Sirius, at this student she had once found so troublesome. Sirius had been extremely handsome in his student days, but now, a short stubble covered his chin and cheeks, and a few strands of silver streaked his dark hair, making him look somewhat weathered. He was only in his early 30s. Professor McGonagall smiled sadly, patted the middle-aged man's shoulder, and said softly, "No matter what, It's good that you're back. Welcome home, child. Sirius wanted to say something, but at that moment, his eyes were red and swollen, his lips trembled, and he couldn't speak. He tried desperately to hold back his tears, but they streamed down his face uncontrollably. Chapter 323 The Great Ying has its own national conditions here. Countless conflicts have occurred at Hogwarts, ranging from minor squabbles between students to full-blown brawls between houses. But most of these conflicts remain confined to the student level, rarely escalating to the professors. After all, the teachers were all quite old, and as colleagues, they saw each other frequently. Aside from Snape, everyone had their pride. Therefore, it was truly rare for two professors to stand facing each other at the castle gates, swords drawn, and clashing, so soon after the start of the semester, even before the sorting ceremony. The young wizards had certainly had their fill of spectacle, almost ready to cheer and shout for the two to actually have a real fight. They were already tired of Potter and Malfoy's hand-to-hand combat and were craving something more exciting. Unfortunately, Professor McGonagall's sudden appearance abruptly interrupted the two single old men's foreplay, leaving the students quite disappointed. But the students' enthusiasm remained undiminished. Even after arriving at the Great Hall, they were still discussing the incident and speculating about the feud between Snape and Black. So much so that the Sorting Hat's annual concert became the most insignificant little event. After the song ended, the Sorting Hat noticed only sparse, perfunctory applause and protested, "What's going on? Why can't everyone listen to my song quietly?" Professor Flitwick, who presided over the sorting house, stood beside the triangular stool and whispered, "It's probably because a new defense against the dark arts teacher has arrived, making everyone a bit excited." "Don't new teachers come every year?" the Sorting Hat asked, puzzled. "It's never been like this before. It seems there was a conflict with Professor Snape," Professor Flitwick explained. "Who is it? So bold?" the Sorting Hat asked with interest. "Dare to mess with that petty Snape?" The Sorting Hat genuinely didn't know who the new professor was. In the first few years, it would have cared a bit, but later the position rotated every year, so it stopped caring. Who would care about a consumable item? Sirius Black, Professor Flitwick said in a low voice. "He attended school here over a decade ago. Do you remember him?" "So it was that guy. How could I forget?" the Sorting Hat cursed through gritted teeth. "Black stole me from the headmaster's office and took me to Black Lake to wash. That rotten seed." Professor Flitwick hadn't expected this grudge. He glanced at the filthy Sorting Hat and cautiously asked, "Wouldn't a wash be better? I'm a 1,000-year-old hat. How could I withstand being washed in lake water?" the Sorting Hat retorted angrily. "The dampness and cold seep into my clothes, and now I have a fever and a terrible sore throat." "Your imagination is pretty vivid, isn't it? And I was once worn by Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw," the Sorting Hat muttered. "That scent has all been washed away, so I'm no longer the original hat." Professor Flitwick was speechless. As the saying goes, a hat reflects its owner. If the Sorting Hat looked like this, what must Gryffindors themselves look like? Seeing Professor Flitwick's silence, the Sorting Hat grew bored and sighed. "Phileas, why are you the one doing the sorting? Where's Neville?" Professor Flitwick picked up the parchment and explained. Professor McGonagall had something come up. "That's a real shame," the Sorting Hat sighed. "She missed the most beautiful song of the year. I truly feel sorry for her." Professor Flitwick raised an eyebrow, but he felt that when Professor McGonagall entrusted him with this task, she didn't seem regretful, but rather inexplicably happy and relieved. "How was my singing?" the Sorting Hat asked again. "Wasn't the lyrics beautiful, and your voice pure and flawless?" Professor Flitwick wanted to say it sounded like noise, but being so direct might hurt the Sorting Hat's feelings. He was an honest man and didn't like to lie, so he said tactfully, "Your singing is as delicious as fermented shark meat." Shark meat? The Sorting Hat had never eaten shark, but he knew it was a high-end product. "Phileas, you may be short, but you have a really nice voice." Professor Flitwick cleared his throat and quickly read out the list, instructing the young wizards to begin their sorting. While the sorting was taking place, the Hufflepuff students began their usual summer homework. Usually, Hannah and Susan were the most active at this time, but tonight the two were huddled together, engrossed in something. "What are you looking at?" asked Ralph curiously. Hannah glanced around and lowered her voice. "It's a follow-up to the conflict between Snape and Professor Black. Someone else wrote it. I just bought it." "Someone actually writes stuff?" Ralph looked at her in surprise and leaned closer, but after glancing at just a few lines, he was immediately stunned. The parchment was filled with phrases like Black cornered Snape against the wall and gently stroked his hair, and Snape gently picked Black up from behind, etc. This was too fast. The conflict had only just ended, and Hogwarts was already rife with fanfiction and stories about the two of them. Sure enough, the world of BL, boys love, is unique here. Ralph seemed to remember something, his expression suddenly changing. There aren't any articles about me, are there? He asked. Of course there are, Hannah chuckled, covering her mouth. Since you enrolled, there have been the most articles featuring you. The girls are all secretly passing them around. Ralph, blame it on your good looks, Susan teased. More beautiful than many girls, the sorting ceremony had ended. Professor Dumbledore stood up, wearing a magnificent blue velvet robe with stars embroidered in gold thread on the chest. The old man's hair and beard were several feet long, he wore semicircular spectacles, and his nose was sharply hooked. Welcome, Professor Dumbledore said, the candlelight making his carefully styled beard gleam with hair wax. Welcome everyone to Hogwarts for the new school year. Before the banquet begins, I have a few things to tell you. The first, and most important thing, Dumbledore cleared his throat and continued, the Dementors of Azkaban, in order to carry out the Ministry of Magic's mission to capture Peter Pettigrew, will be stationed at all the school's entrances. During their stay, no student is permitted to leave the school without permission, especially not to go to the Forbidden Forest, Hogsmeade, or similar places. As he said this, Dumbledore's gaze swept across the 4 tables without lingering, but it lingered on Ralph. Ralph nonchalantly raised his head, his thick skin concealing his true feelings. If he wasn't mentioned by name, he wasn't being talked about. The second thing, Dumbledore continued, after Professor Lockhart left. We found a new defense against the dark arts professor, Professor Black. Sirius stood up and smiled. People say the position of defense against the dark arts is cursed. I heard this terrifying school legend when I was your age. I've also witnessed some teacher turnover. Then some of you might be asking, Professor Black, if you know it's dangerous, why did you come? Sirius's words had barely faded when a student, as if playing a comedian, shouted, Professor Black, if you know it's dangerous, why did you come? Everyone turned to look at the Gryffindor table and burst into laughter. Fred Weasley and George Weasley, right. Sirius looked at the 2 students and said with a smile, very good question. The reason is simple. As you may know, I just got out of Azkaban. Sirius smiled wryly, a middle-aged man who has just been released from prison, exonerated, with no work experience, and about to turn 35, it's hard to find a job to support a family. When I apply for a job, they glance at my resume, then at my age, and tell me to go home and wait for news, and then, I never hear from them again. The young wizards knew it was a joke, but they couldn't help laughing again. Then, I asked myself a question. Sirius paused for a moment, then continued, is Azkaban and Dementors more terrifying, or is the curse more terrifying? I told myself, the former is more terrifying. Since I didn't die in Azkaban, what curse am I afraid of? I know some will call me foolish, others will say I'm brave, whatever you think. After all, bravery and foolishness are often separated by a fine line. Sirius's lips curled into a smile. Anyway, whatever curse this position may be, I hope this lucky fellow can escape its clutches. Thank you, everyone. At that moment, everyone applauded enthusiastically, including the Slytherin students. Chapter 324 Gaunch Deal. Following Sirius Black, Dumbledore announced that Hagrid would be taking on the role of Professor of the Protection of Magical Creatures. However, the students' cheers were noticeably quieter. Hagrid had been expelled in his 3rd year and spent many years as a key-keeper. He lacked qualifications, experience, and good looks. Hagrid was even more of a 3-0 than Sirius Black, a convict. His only advantage was probably his connections. He knew Hogwarts better than any of the new professors. Consulting him was the safest bet for anyone wanting to teach there. No one doubted Hagrid's ability to handle the ferocious magical creatures, given his physique, but the students seriously questioned his suitability for the teaching position. Most of the young wizards approached Hagrid with a questioning mindset. Regardless, the new professors for the semester were now decided. The only question was how many would die next year. After Dumbledore finished speaking, the opening banquet began. The food was plentiful, mountains of cod cake and cheese, large chunks of smoked goat meat, almost charred veal ribs, and rare steaks. After dessert, the prefects led the students from each house toward their respective common rooms. Ralph broke away from the Hufflepuff group, avoided the Gryffindor and Ravenclaw students, and made his way to the headmaster's office, eventually arriving at the Gripper statue. Dumbledore often changed his passwords, but they were usually strange little snacks. The boy whispered, "Skull Marshmallow." The Gripper jumped aside, the wall split in two, and Ralph went up the spiral staircase to an oak door, pushing it open and going inside. Dumbledore hadn't returned to his office yet, so Ralph waited. He quickly noticed the sorting hat on the desk, walked over, and put it on his head. The hat seemed to be muttering something under its breath. Ralph asked curiously, "Sorting hat, what are you doing?" "I'm writing a new song for next school year." Ralph was stunned. He had always assumed the Sorting Hat's new song was like the Badger's summer homework, hastily put together a couple of days before school started. He hadn't expected it to be written a year in advance. The Sorting Hat seemed to know what the boy was thinking. It lowered its voice and said, "The greatest works take a long time to sculpt. I call it slow and meticulous work." Ralph inwardly scoffed. Writing like that, it couldn't be done with just hands. Well, the Sorting Hat certainly didn't have hands. "By the way, Scamander, I have a question for you." "What question?" A wizard praised. "Someone's singing, 'as delicious as shark meat.'" What did that mean? The Sorting Hat was waiting for Ralph to utter a word of praise, but the boy thought for a moment, then shrugged and said, "A pile of poop." "I think that's about it. You're talking nonsense." The Sorting Hat immediately became somewhat embarrassed and angry. "Have you ever eaten shark meat?" "Yes, I ate it once during summer vacation on the Mayflower. I felt nauseous for days." Seeing the Sorting Hat's exasperated look, even a fool like Ralph knew he had said the wrong thing. He quickly changed the subject, saying, "I also have something I want to ask you." "What is it?" the Sorting Hat asked sullenly. "I met a mermaid named Marcella. She's a golden, two-tailed mermaid who lives in the Aegean Sea," Ralph said quickly. "She said Gryffindor visited their tribe 1,000 years ago and took something with him." "That's true. Albus asked me about it before," the Sorting Hat said listlessly. "Gryffindor heard that the mermaids there were all incredibly beautiful, so he went to see them. He accidentally saw the little mermaid bathing, and then there was a chaotic chase." Ralph wasn't interested in peeping at a bather. He continued, "What did Gryffindor take?" "It seems to be a key." "Where is that key?" the boy asked hastily. "It's at Hogwarts. Gryffindor said he put it somewhere marked by a mermaid," the Sorting Hat muttered. "I don't know exactly where." Ralph took off his hat and closed his eyes in deep thought. He thought for a long time but couldn't recall where there was a mermaid mark in Hogwarts Castle. With a creak, the door suddenly opened, and Dumbledore walked in. "Professor Dumbledore, good evening." Ralph stood up to greet him. "Hello, Ralph." Dumbledore walked to a chair, sat down, looked up at the boy, and smiled. "I've made a pot of mate tea. Would you like a cup?" "Yes, thank you very much." Dumbledore gently waved his wand, and a teacup filled with a beverage appeared on his table. Ralph picked up the teacup with his palm, breathed on it to cool the tea, and said softly, "Professor, I went to the Department of Mysteries during the summer to apply for some information and encountered a wizard." Dumbledore took a sip of the bitter tea and calmly said, "Corvinus Gaunt, you know him?" Ralph raised an eyebrow. "Yes, I met Gaunt many years ago." Dumbledore pressed two fingers against the clear teacup, looking down at the tea surface. "I did some deals with him back then." "Deal?" Ralph's eyes widened. "Yes, one of the deals was about Harry," Dumbledore said bluntly. "I received a prophecy that a boy would defeat Voldemort. Voldemort also knew of the prophecy and searched everywhere for the prophesied child. He had two candidates, but ultimately chose Harry, but I didn't know how Harry, a 1-year-old child, could defeat the most powerful dark wizard in history," Dumbledore recalled. "To protect him, I took many precautions, such as using the faithful charm. Out of caution, I also made a deal with Gaunt beforehand, obtaining a more powerful spell to protect Harry from Voldemort." Dumbledore slowly continued, "Gaunt gave me an ancient spell, which I then taught to Lily, as a final safeguard." "You know what happened later?" Sirius Black temporarily changed the Secret Keeper, and because of Peter's betrayal, James and Lily died. Dumbledore sighed. "I didn't expect this magic to be useful, but it played a decisive role. Lily used it, sacrificing her own life, to cast a protective love charm on Harry, reflecting Tom's killing curse." "Why does Gaunt know these spells?" Ralph asked curiously. "I've said it more than once. Before Sumer, Assyria, and ancient Egypt, there was an even more brilliant wizarding civilization," Dumbledore explained. "That civilization suddenly vanished one day, leaving behind many magical ruins. British wizards discovered one of these ruins and established a research institution there, which is now the Department of Mysteries. Through studying those ruins, the Department of Mysteries obtained many ancient spells, such as the Reversal of Hours charm, which created the Time Turner, and then there's Love, the spell I traded for. It has the powerful ability to reflect the killing curse. Gwent himself is a genius. He's over 100 years older than me and served as the director of the Department of Mysteries for many years, so it's not surprising that he researched many powerful spells. Dumbledore looked at the boy and asked, "What do you want with him?" Ralph paused for a moment and said, "I'm requesting the information about Dementors left by Extus." He refused you. "No." Ralph narrowed his eyes and said cautiously, "Gwent proposed a trade with me." "A trade for what?" "Gwent knows I obtained the basilisk from the Chamber of Secrets." Ralph paused for a moment and said, "He really wants that basilisk." Ralph had already bred a new basilisk, and Slytherin's basilisk was blind, so it wasn't very valuable to him. He was indeed tempted. Dumbledore thoughtfully swirled his teacup, then downed it in one gulp, saying, "I'll check on that basilisk when I have time. If there are no problems, we can trade." Having received his answer, Ralph got up and left the headmaster's office. Dumbledore picked up a spellbook from the table and flipped through a few pages with his fingers. A fire crackled in the fireplace beside him, illuminating Dumbledore's face, making it seem as if a ghost was reading. "Gaunt. Slytherin, I tested positive. I went downstairs to pick up takeout yesterday, and today I tested positive. The problem is, my activity range is less than a few dozen meters. The most ridiculous thing is that the takeout I ordered last night was from a restaurant called Sheep's Big Bowl of Lamb Waffle Noodles, and after eating it, I tested positive today. Damn. Now I'm feeling chills and feverish all over. Dear readers, please take care of yourselves and try to keep updating. Let's see how things go tomorrow." Chapter 325 The Badger Warrior. The next morning, when Ralph arrived at the Great Hall, Prefect Cedric was distributing the school year's schedules. The schedules included many more electives, meaning their free time would be significantly reduced this year. Of course, compared to other houses, the Hufflepuffs wisely refrained from choosing too many courses. Not only would they bite off more than they could chew, but more importantly, they might exhaust themselves. So, while students from other houses were taking every elective they could get, Hufflepuffs were unusually restrained, with many students choosing only one elective. Heads of other houses, when speaking to students, generally advised them to choose fewer courses, like Hermione. Only in Hufflepuff, when Professor Sprout spoke to students, did he advise them to choose more. The Hufflepuffs even gave this a catchy and elegant name, the Hufflepuff Health-Preserving Learning Method. With health-preserving learning came wolf-like learning, most notably Ravenclaw, who were seen as outcasts for choosing too few courses. The entire house was engaged in a fierce competition. Besides these, there's Gryffindor's hot-blooded study method, 3 minutes of intense study every morning, creating a detailed study plan, but after that initial burst of energy, they enter a period of fatigue and then become listless. Looking back at the plan in the evening, they realize they haven't accomplished a single thing, then regret it deeply, vowing to do it one last time, but the next day is the same. Every day is day 0, never day 1. Slytherin, on the other hand, uses a pure-blood course selection method, first investigating the ancestral blood of the teachers. Muggle-born wizards are naturally excluded. Courses like Muggle studies, considered heretical, are strictly forbidden. After breakfast, Ralph left the Great Hall and headed towards Hagrid's cabin. The first class today was protecting magical creatures, which they were taking with the Ravenclaw students. However, the Ravenclaw students had already left, and most of the Badgers were still asleep. The sky was overcast, the air was chilly, and the downpour had subsided into long, continuous drizzle. Shirley stood alone in the rain, holding an umbrella, waiting for someone. With nothing else to do, she gently held the handle, twisting it lightly with 2 fingers, the umbrella swirling and swaying in the rain. From a distance, it looked like a painting, exquisitely beautiful. Ralph couldn't help but stop and glance at it a few more times. Seeing the boy emerge, Shirley jogged to his side, folded her umbrella, and wiped the raindrops that had splashed onto her hair. The two walked side by side, weaving through the rain. The girl with the ponytail dried herself and couldn't help but ask curiously, "What were you looking at just now?" Ralph thought for a moment and said, "I was looking at the rain scene." The rain scene. Shirley tilted her head slightly, looking up as if pondering what was so beautiful about this annoying rain. Ralph looked up at the sky with her and chuckled. "Shirley, you've missed a lot of beautiful sights." "Really?" The girl with the ponytail turned to look at the boy, her eyes full of laughter. "But I remember yesterday on the train, you said you hated this awful British weather." "Did I say that?" Ralph rubbed his chin. "Could you be mistaken?" Shirley smiled. "My memory isn't so bad that I could forget something from a day ago. I remember now." "I think I did say that." Ralph nodded slowly, reluctantly admitting it. He paused, then blinked. "Looks like my aesthetic sense has improved dramatically overnight." "Shirley, do you think someone with this kind of talent should become an aesthetics expert?" Shirley tried to hold back her laughter, but couldn't help but burst out laughing. She ran a finger across her cheek. "Could you be any more shameless?" Ralph looked at the girl who was doubled over with laughter. He reached out and gently grasped her long ponytail, smiling tenderly with narrowed eyes. "If you laugh again, I'll dock your pay." Shirley did indeed put on a stern face, but her bright eyes still curved into crescent moons as she pitifully pleaded, "Please don't dock it." The girl with the ponytail looked like a child caught red-handed, her pitiful face radiating irresistible charm. Ralph almost gave her a raise, let alone docked her pay. The two discussed aesthetics the whole way and soon arrived at Hagrid's cabin. Hagrid was standing at the door, wearing a moleskin coat and looking very excited, surrounded by a group of Ravenclaw students. A while later, the Hufflepuff students arrived at the cabin just in time for class. Ralph was considered early. "Come on, hurry up," Hagrid shouted, "we have something good for you today. A wonderful magical creatures class is about to begin. Is everyone here? Okay, follow me." Led by Hagrid, they walked along the edge of the forbidden area, and 5 minutes later, they found themselves in an enclosure. As a renowned magic school, Hogwarts has its own enclosure, housing many animals. Many of the small animals the students eat daily come from here, and the milk is also produced and consumed locally, all natural and without any additives. Most importantly, it has a rich flavor. Unlike some milk that's watery and makes you feel like a jetpack warrior after drinking it, you might almost think you're lactose intolerant. Of course, a large number of magical creatures are also kept here. Hagrid's daily tasks, besides feeding them, include guarding against thieves. For example, those who have exceeded their magical material quotas, have had their school approval rejected, and then secretly come to the enclosure to obtain magical materials. A certain Professor C, who wishes to remain anonymous. "Everyone, come to this fence," Hagrid said. "Now, the first thing you need to do is open your books." The students quickly took out the Monster Book of Monsters, the most ferocious textbook in Hogwarts history, which most of the young wizards had already tamed before class. Seeing the listless monster books, Hagrid couldn't help but ask, "What did you do to them, Professor Hagrid?" "I fed them magic glue." Justin raised his hand. "Then they can't bite anymore." Justin's face was beaming with excitement, practically screaming "Praise me," and bonus points. Macmillan wasn't to be outdone, adding, "I stapled the book's mouth shut, but it still won't turn the pages." The other students chimed in, sharing their success stories: pepper spray, soapy water, even sky lanterns. Basically, they used every drastic method they could think of to subdue the irritable monster books. Hagrid listened, bewildered by the various early human methods of taming monster books. This was nothing like what he'd expected. "There's a sensitive area on the spine of the book. If you rub it from bottom to top with your fingers, the book will get excited. Then soften and open up." Hearing this, some students suddenly understood, while a small group looked at Hagrid. "You really have to be talking about how to open a monster book." While the students were rubbing it, Hagrid pulled a chain from the forest, with 12 ferocious beasts bound to it. Their bodies, hind legs, and tails were like horses, but their forelegs, wings, and heads resembled eagles. Hagrid shook the chain, bringing the beasts before the students, who all backed away in fear. "Don't be afraid," Hagrid quickly said, "I'm here." But Hagrid's words clearly didn't reassure them, especially the beasts' steel-sharp beaks and the claws on their forelegs, half a foot long. A single blow from those could probably poke 1,000 holes in a person. "Does anyone know what these are?" Hagrid asked. Just as an awkward silence was about to fall, Ralph raised his hand and answered, "Professor Hagrid, this is a hippogriff." "Very good, Hufflepuff plus 20, cough, plus 15 points, Hagrid announced happily. Normally, professors would add 2 or 3 points, at most 5. Hagrid immediately added 15. He clearly hadn't adapted to his professorial role and was extremely careless in awarding points. Or rather, it wasn't careless, It was quite similar to Professor Snape's deduction system. The Ravenclaw students surged forward, eager to rack up points for the House Cup charge. Hagrid was also infected by the Hawk's enthusiasm, and he waved his hand, saying, "So, who wants to get up close and personal with these little cuties?" Just now it was just species identification, and now it's fast-forwarded to physical contact. Such a huge leap. The students immediately stepped back, becoming modest with each other. Ralph, Sherry, and Neville stood motionless among the group, and soon a large open space appeared around them. Hagrid waved and laughed. "Very well, Neville Longbottom, you give it a try." All the students applauded. Who said Neville was a coward? He was practically a badger warrior. Neville, much better today, fever gone, but still coughing, sore throat, and runny nose. Hopefully, this time the fever is really gone and won't come back tonight. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.